Yes, I finally got to go. Hi guys, I'm a bit late. I had to reboot everything because I had trouble going live. So yeah, we're off.
But you know how YouTube likes to stifle conversations about
Hi Diane. Yeah, I couldn't go live. I kept trying to go live and I had to completely reboot the TV, the computer and the modem. It took about 20 minutes to sort out. So yeah, finally I got going.
Your YouTube feed is crap. Stop wasting your time watching bot-boosted shills and self-appointed gurus cloying for your attention. Instead, join the Goslings interview live stream and podcast. The Goslings, a dark-lit digital speakeasy of free thinkers. A super chat of radical truth-seeking wizards who eat trolls for second breakfast. Topics that'll make your mama's hair stand on end. Ideas that'll make your pastor's knees knock. Guests that will illuminate the hidden chambers of your mind. And interviews that strike down the darkness. Welcome.
Hey Phil, good to see you, bro.
The Goslings.
What's up, everyone?
Hey everybody,
I'm Jonathan,
I am Nick.
and we are the Goslings.
Welcome to our. This is going to be huge.
Yeah,
I've been so excited for this interview for a long time. Glad you're joining us. Before you do anything, hit that button, hit that subscribe button, smash that bell, do all the things.
share the video, like and comment, subscribe, all that.
Yeah.
Show YouTube that the algorithm will not keep us down.
No, it will not. It will not unless we say naughty words. We're going to try real hard not to do that.
Yeah.
But you know how YouTube likes to stifle conversations about what they're planning.
Everything that matters,
Right,
which we're going to talk
exactly.
about today with one of our highly
exactly
esteemed guests.
That's
we
right.
Absolutely love. So, but we're going to get through the quick obligatories, and then we're going to jump right into it.
Right. Let's do the obligatories first. You want to take
Yes.
Our first sponsor?
Yes. JardaniJovanovic.com. Hairstyling products made by real men for real men. Small husband and wife team make these hair care products and skincare products. And they are super based. They're conservative Christians running a small business out of Arizona. They are glorious. I always can tell the difference in my Leonidian beard.
It's very nice looking.
Yes.
Very full.
If you
I want to just kind of get
just
close, crawl up next
admire
to it.
Yeah, just nestle in it.
Yeah.
You know,
You're going to be a great Santa someday.
burrow in it someday.
Yeah.
I'm already like that, like mid-stage Santa Claus in the claymation movie. You know, the one that's like kind of fat, but like he's still not like really old and fat yet, but he's got the ginger beard.
You're like 45-minute mark, Tim Allen.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I am.
All right. Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm Tim Allen before he gets the red suit. You know, he's like in the doctor's office wondering what's going on. It's called a monostat. Anyways, be as sexy as you are deadly with JardaniJovanovic.com hair care products. I will spell it for you right now because it might need to be spelled JardaniJovanovich.com. Be cool, be sexy, be deadly. Give 007 a run for his money. Be the John Wick of your neighborhood. With JardaniJovanovic.com.
Nice.
Take it away.
Nice. I will be mentioning this is our Kothon Spartan mug. These are made by Joel Chirico at ChiricoPottery.com. Handcrafted each and every one. Handcrafted, hand painted by a master potter, made in conjunction with or in collaboration with Stephen Pressfield to replicate what they believe the actual Spartan Kothon mug looked like. This is basically the closest they could get to what the real deal was right here. So go to ChericoPottery.com, check it out. They are a pretty penny, but worth every one of them.
Yeah, they really are. CHERRICO pottery.com, Cherico Pottery.
Awesome.
Check them out.
Let's do our toast.
Okay, toast time.
I'm getting anxious. I'm ready to get Derek on.
I know. Yeah, I know, right?
Who went first? I think you went first last time.
I think so. Why don't you take it away?
I'll do it this time. Take up the broken sword of your father
and strike down the darkness.
Amen.
You hear how well these things clank?
I know.
When we do a toast?
Yeah, it's also a nice testament to Cherico Pottery's durability.
Yeah.
That we haven't smashed these things yet, you know?
We'll try harder next time.
Will we? I don't know. I love this thing.
I know.
So, anyways, all right.
Well, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here to talk about the Beast
Yes.
and the Metaverse.
Yep.
You, a man who needs no introduction. You know Derek Gilbert, DerekGilbert.com.
Gilbert House.
Yeah, 5 and 10, Skywatch, author of numerous books.
Yeah, we are very fortunate and
researcher.
blessed to count him as a friend and someone who has been on our live stream before and has decided to come back to talk about all things relevant when it comes to the
That's right.
Metaverse.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek Gilbert, how are you?
It's an honor to be back with you, fellas. I really enjoyed it the last time here. Enjoy what you do and appreciate the level of work that you put into the production quality. My podcast is simple. We run the intro, run the outro, and stick a promo in the middle, and that's it.
Well, you know what, though? There's points for efficiency in that, Derek, or extemporaneous speaking sometimes.
Well, that's true.
Seems to be working really well. I should probably just do that.
You know, it's quality, not quantity. That's the motto there at the Goslings.
That's right. Well, obviously, because we have Derek Gilbert on as our guest today, I think we have proven that we can achieve that for sure.
That level.
So, this is been a hot topic lately, and for me, this has been something that's been on my mind persistently for months as we look at developing technologies. As the world is like burning down around us, technology continues to advance, continues to get more invasive. And I'm like, I wonder if that's part of the plan.
Yeah.
So one of the first things I wanted to ask you kind of had to do with cryptocurrency. Like, how do you see that playing into the end times?
That's a good question. That's one that was addressed by a friend of ours, Guy Malone, who is now an editor for Bitcoin Magazine. He's got a very interesting life. He lives in Roswell, New Mexico. He's originally from your neck of the woods, Nashville.
Okay.
And, relocated to Roswell years ago because he is an experiencer, contactee, and started looking for answers. He would be somebody worth getting on the Goslings. He hosted several conferences in Roswell called the Ancient of Days conferences with people like Mike Heiser, the late Patrick Flynn, but he got some secular folks in there as well who are well known, Richard Hoagland, to come and address the conference. In fact, the city of Roswell let him coordinate the actual UFO festival a few years ago.
Cool.
So he is our missionary to Roswell, but his day job now is working in the field of cryptocurrency and specifically as an editor. So he is really in touch with what's going on with this. And we invited him to address this issue at Skywatch TV for the virtual conference in the spring. And his topic was, is Bitcoin the mark of the beast? Because this is the kind of technology, for those of us not really familiar with it, and interest of full disclosure, Sharon and I don't own any cryptocurrency, no Bitcoin. And those are terms that overlap, but they are not synonymous.
Right.
Bitcoin is a decentralized form of electronic currency where loosely organized nodes of computers all over the world help process transactions and validate the transactions and make sure that they're secure. Nobody controls Bitcoin. No one entity, no one person, no one company. Now, there are a lot of other cryptocurrencies out there, probably the best known is Ethereum. And then there are what are called stable coins, which are cryptocurrencies that are pegged, whose value is pegged to a fiat currency. And probably the best known is Tether.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering about this because I do not follow cryptocurrency or Bitcoin very closely. But Guy addressed the issue and said, no, Bitcoin cannot be the mark of the beast because of the fact that it's a distribution network. No one person, no one government entity, no one corporation has control over Bitcoin. However, central banks are ramping up their efforts to develop their own digital currencies. So you're going to see the acronym CBDC a lot more frequently in the months ahead. Central bank digital currency.
Yep.
China is already working on it. They've already rolled out a digital yuan. The Bank of Japan, European Central Bank, Bank of England, Federal Reserve Bank, the New York Fed, just within the last couple of weeks, has announced it's launching a 12-week trial that will involve some of the largest financial players in the United States. Chase Mellon, I'm probably getting Bank of New York Mellon, BNY Mellon, right, and a number of others that are all connected to this, giving this a 3-month trial run to see if the Federal Reserve Bank can create and process transactions using a digital dollar. The difference between a central bank digital currency, an electronic medium of exchange that's controlled by a central bank, is that every transaction using that digital currency is funneled through that central controlling authority. Again, the one advantage of Bitcoin is that it's not controlled by any one entity. You've got, which is why governments and central bankers are trying to eliminate it. But it's even worse. So elimination of financial privacy, that's what they're trying to accomplish. But it's even worse than that. And this is something that Guy pointed out in his presentation. And you may be able to find this still at Guy's website, guymalone.com. He pointed out that a central bank digital currency would give the issuer the power to decide what that currency could be spent on. So really determined.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, Mr. Gilbert, I'm sorry, your cholesterol count is a little too high today.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said the wrong thing. We're going to wipe you out.
Right. Imagine China's social credit score, social credit system, married to the medium of exchange that you use to buy and sell each day. That's what a central bank digital currency could lead to, and that could become the mark of the beast.
Yeah, it's one more step on the road to the mark of the beast, and we see it even now with the 1099-Ks that Venmo and other digital transfer services and apps are going to start handing out per the IRS. And so that $600 that you made for selling your old desk or whatever to your neighbor 6 months ago, all of a sudden, don't be surprised if you get a 1099-K from the IRS for it. And now, so they're squeezing, it's like the noose is tightening on all forms of currency that they can get their hands on. How long do you think, if you can even quantify it, how long do you think it is before fiat currency is evaporated? Because they've already tried to do that during the past couple of years, because it was a health concern that it would spread.
Right. Oh,
you remember that?
You're spreading the COVID by giving the paper monies. Sorry, I said one of the bad words.
That's right. Spreading the cooties.
The cooties.
Just take a jab and eat your bugs. Yeah. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Probably within the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Fiat currency, for whatever you think about a fiat currency, the fact that it's backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the United States government, it's not really backed by what it used to be backed by, the gold standard. You can't physically trade your dollars for gold or silver anymore, but nobody seems to care. This is just, we're being conditioned to accept something like this. And they're already pushing us toward the elimination of cash, even before the announcement that the central banks were beginning to investigate and do research into issuing a CBDC, because the only people who use $100 bills anymore are tax cheats, terrorists, and gangsters or whatever, drug dealers. Well, no. I mean, there are times when having some fiat currency in your pocket is helpful. Like when you're in the middle of nowhere, your car breaks down, and you got to pay the guy with the tow truck.
Yeah.
Or, heaven forbid, the internet goes out and your debit card doesn't work anymore. We here in the West, and see, this is one of the problems I have with digital currencies, even Bitcoin. And I know that Guy would disagree with me on this, and he's a very intelligent guy, knows a lot more about Bitcoin than I do. So please take that into consideration when you consider my opinion. Yeah. I just think putting my personal wealth into a bunch of bits and bytes just makes me really uncomfortable. Of course, having said that, I can't go down to our local bank and say, okay, show me the stack of monies in your vault that belongs to me, because they don't have it. They probably have 10%, according to fractional reserve banking requirements. They probably have 10 to 20% of all of the deposits in there at any given time. Because unlike It's a Wonderful Life, all of us don't go rushing down there to the bank and demand our money on building a loan at the same time. But that's what happened with FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried and that cryptocurrency exchange recently. I'll set that aside for a moment. We can come back to that. But we're being conditioned to accept that this is okay. It used to be we wanted to have something tangible as an asset. We wanted to know that these Federal Reserve notes or silver certificates or whatever could be exchanged for something of value, gold or the equivalent value of gold or silver. That ended in 1969 when the U.S. moved off the gold standard. So now the Treasury can print as much money as it wants. And it's just backed by,
backed by the hope that the rest of the world will still buy oil.
You know what it's backed by? It's backed it's backed by the drizzling brains of JFK. That's because they had to get him out of the way in order to, there is that thought that like he just wanted to go back to a silver, silver-backed currency.
But we've been conditioned over the years, hey, what's in your wallet? Stop holding up the line by standing there and writing a check or handing out cash and looking for exact change. Just swipe your card and move on. So we've already kind of been conditioned to accept that our money isn't real money. It's just digital bits and bytes being moved back and forth. So that's a short step from that to cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and there are a lot of crypto exchanges right now that are offering essentially a debit type card that you can use anywhere. So you tap your card, it automatically calculates, it does the exchange, of course minus I'm sure a very significant fee that they get off of that. But they're like, hey, you can spend your crypto just like that.
The idea though that you're placing your money in a crypto exchange like FTX or any of the other crypto exchanges out there, again, nullifies the one advantage of Bitcoin, is that nobody has control over your money. You hold it in your own wallet, and nobody can get at it. At least that's theoretically the case. Now, the downside, of course, is that if things really hit the fan and the internet breaks down, we start having rolling blackouts or whatever, how do you get at it?
Right. Yeah. How do you use it?
The one advantage of Bitcoin really is that it's really, really useful until things really break down, in which case you got to fall back on the fiat currency or tangible assets. And, Sharon and I, we've got lots of beans and toilet paper because we figure those will be the medium, the actual media of exchange when things really get bad. You can't eat gold or silver. And guys with guns will be looking for.
I completely agree with him on that. It's no use owning gold and silver because you can't eat it.
Stuff like that. Beans and toilet paper. Pay that for something.
Beans, toilet paper, and then the sundries. Alcohol. Tobacco products, contraceptives, penicillin, any of the things that because even fiat currency, you can start a fire with it, but that's about it.
Long shelf life and some use, some value to it. So
Well, it's nothing new. I know that I have a real good friend who is from Chicago, and he made a ton of money 10 years ago having crypto and maybe Bitcoin specifically exchange kiosks like ATMs basically.
Oh wow.
set up like in New York, and so and even and like super smart guy. He's like one of those 150 IQ guys, where like he reads the way most people like watch YouTube. But even I was having an FAL put together with a recon counter sniper Marine from the first Gulf War like 15 years ago. It was like this whole weekend we hung out together, and he's telling me all these stories, and he told me that like Fort Knox is empty, and it's been empty for what 30 years, at the time.
Yeah.
So when you hear that,
But the thing about these crypto exchanges is that they are not regulated. I mean, as wild as our banking system is, and I wrote about this in our book Giants, Gods, and Dragons, as we were writing about the rider on the black horse, which we believe is the ancient entity known as Nabu to the Babylonians, or Hermes to the Greeks, Mercury to the Romans, whose name comes from the same Latin root from which we get merchant and merchandise and mercantile. The god of exchange, the god of commerce, the god of business, but also the god of thieves, probably not coincidentally. In history, he was the god of ledgers and accounts, the god of scribes. One who kept track of who was giving what to the temple. And the rider on the black horse in Revelation 6 is described as carrying a set of scales, and it kind of makes sense in this, in the context of business, weights and measures and all that. But it really, the Greek word really means yoke, like what you put around the neck of an ox so that the ox will pull the plow. Well, we are the oxen with the zugos, the yoke around our necks, for those who are building this global system of financial servitude. I mean, this is why God told Moses, the Jews, the Israelites would have to have a jubilee every 7 years. Debts would be released during the Shemitah year every 7 years, so that there would be no debt slaves. But now we live in a culture here in the modern West where we're accustomed to 30-year mortgages, student loans that take 20 to 25 years to pay off, credit card debt that you can never get out of. You're like George Jetson on the treadmill. Jane, get me off this crazy thing. Car loan, it used to be 4 or 5 years, and now 7, 8 years. Some are running as long as 10. And it's all to get us on this debt treadmill where we are paying into a system. And, it's so inconvenient. You have to write all those checks every month. Here, just let us draw it right out of your account. We don't see most of the money that we transact. I mean, Sharon and I, we use debt, paying over the internet, for most of our bills. So again, the money, we never see it go into the account. We never see it go out. But, praise God, the lights are still on. So that must be working. It's a short step away from the majority of the public being sold on the idea that for the sake of security and make it easier to serve the unbanked, those in disadvantaged communities who, it's so difficult to get the stimulus checks to certain people because they don't have bank accounts. But if they all got, an ID that's built right into their hand or their forehead, which is a mockery of where the phylacteries, the tefillin, were worn by the Jews, on the forehead or on the hand. It's people will line up for it. Great. It'll go right into I'll get these digital bucks in my Fed bank account, and then all I have to do is just wave my hand when I go through. It's coming, and it probably will be within, I would say, a matter of decades, if not just years.
And it's going to be that digital currency that they're going to be able to control.
And it'll be controlled by your social credit score. I mean, and this is common knowledge outside of the circles that we tend to run in, the Christian esoterica, conspiracy circles. This is common knowledge amongst to be honest with you, amongst the NPCs, and half of them are all for the social credit score. They think it's a great idea because they're godless. So they inherently ascribe to environmentalism, which is Luciferian at the least, if not outright satanic, because it's a misanthropic agenda. It's an anti-human agenda.
Yeah, and I think too, like the social credit score, I think that is going to converge with credit score in general.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you're going to have to be saddled with debt, because that's the borrower's slave to the lender,
right?
And they want you they want everything so heavily leveraged that they can control you. Yeah. And I think that if you're a debt-free person, I don't know if you think this or not, Derek, but I wonder if you are completely debt-free, not beholden to anybody, if that would tank your social credit score in that system.
Yeah, well, I mean, we even see this now where kids coming out of college are told, you should get a credit card so you can start building up your credit score so that you can then borrow more money to get a car and then borrow more money to
yeah. So I was talking to somebody about this, and we were talking about small businesses and how it's almost impossible to Dave Ramsey your way up the ladder as a small business. The only way to really grow your small business into a not so small business is to take on debt and to spend other people's money. Yeah, to get business loans so that you can then pay it off. Like I had insufficient credit, Derek, for the longest time because I'd always Dave Ramsey'd it until I got a credit card, until I got like a $1,500 Regions credit card. And then all of a sudden, you have 3 years later, you have like 770 something credit score, 800 credit score, and you can get all these loans and you get all these offers. Once you're in the coils of the Leviathan, it just smiles at you.
It's the fundamental difference between the West and the East right now, and we're actually seeing global system fracturing. This is going to be interesting to see how it plays out because the globalists like Klaus Schwab and his minions believe that they're going to control things. And right now, China, even though Schwab just recently said, China is kind of a model nation and how we should all be following, China and its policies, zero COVID policies and social credit scores and so forth. China is not going to play ball with the World Economic Forum forever. China's rise to global economic powerhouse really began when it began to partner with the World Economic Forum about 40 years ago.
Yep.
And China has used the gullibility of Western elites and what our friend Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis calls elite capture. I'm sure that term's not original to him, but elite capture. They basically offer incentives through things like the 1,000 Talents Plan to get academics to send all their research back to Beijing in exchange for, gifts.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And we see it in, like the offer to build a Chinese garden as a cultural exchange in Washington, D.C., which the FBI thankfully stepped up and said, hey, wait a minute, that's on the highest point in D.C. with direct line of sight to the Capitol. It's a great listening post. And China's not letting us open any of the building materials before they get to the building site. So let's not do that. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's the one time when the FBI actually did the right thing.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
The Chinese are really smart at this, but Russia's doing the same thing. They're playing longer games, and the Europeans are finally figuring out that this whole Ukraine thing is not working out to their benefit. This past week, they suddenly woke up and realized that the Inflation Reduction Act, another example of how you want to know what any bill passed by Congress does, read the title, assume it's the opposite. The incentives built into the IRA are slanted against European business. So now they've got their cheap energy source cut off thanks to American pressure, and the Nord Stream accident. And they're realizing, wait a minute, the only ones who are really coming out well on this thing are the Americans because they're selling a lot more liquefied natural gas and weapons. And we're the ones who are facing a long, cold, dark winter. The fundamental difference between the U.S. and the West is to a lesser degree, but the U.S. especially, is that we are practicing financial capitalism, where we don't really invest in the means of producing things and then reap the benefits, the profits that accrue from whatever the finished goods are. We invest in other financial instruments. Whereas Russia, India, China, actually the BRICS plus nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and soon to include Saudi Arabia and perhaps Venezuela, perhaps Iran, is that they're actually industrial capitalism. They're actually investing in industry and business and building. And the global South, Africa, they're going to go along with the Chinese and the Russians because they've got the resources and they're willing to offer them cheaper than we in the West. So it's going to be interesting to see how this globalist ideal plays out when you've got this fundamental split taking place between the West, which is the United States and NATO, and pretty much the rest of the world. We have to remember they're just the BRICS nations alone. That's about 2/3 of the world's population right there. And once you get the Saudis into this coalition, a big chunk of the world's hydrocarbons, and thanks to the Chinese and their control over sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the world's rare earth metals too.
Yeah, in fact, one of our good friends and guests, Gabriel Bello, said right there, China thinks in terms of centuries and millennia, unlike our country, which can't seem to think farther than 4 to 8 years. You know,
my dad put it this way. He said the Eastern mindset is like a ballet. There are times when you've got really intense activity, other times where things are slower and slower moving, but it's all choreographed and they know where it's going to end. Whereas Western capitalism is like a hockey game. We put, if we're running behind at the end of the period, we pull the goalie and send everybody down. And okay, we give up an open net goal. All right, but it doesn't matter because everything is about what's going to happen during this 20-minute period. Yeah, and I think he was right.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, Derek, you have mentioned the phrase, what was it, BRICS nations? I've never heard that term before. What is that?
It's a coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Those 5 nations.
Initialism. Okay.
Yeah, they've been together for several years now, essentially as a counterweight to the United States and the West. They realized that between their the populations that they control and also the control over natural resources, Russia, oil, natural gas, that they might benefit from working together to offset the control of world financial markets. For example, the SWIFT interbank system exercised by the United States. United States controls the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. It's all controlled by either the U.S. or European allies. What we're seeing now in Ukraine is a fracturing of this system where the world is being asked essentially to choose sides. And just recently, just within the last couple of months, it was announced by the BRICS nations that Saudi Arabia wants to join this group. Argentina, I believe, Venezuela, perhaps, Iran, perhaps, all being considered. But it is really in response to what Western elites are doing. Like I said, now we're seeing that European politicians, top European officials, according to Politico, are really furious at the Biden White House at continuing to push this and recommend behind the scenes that Volodymyr Zelensky not negotiate with the Russians. It's like the Europeans are the ones who are paying the price for this. Their energy bills have just gone crazy over. And here in the U.S., we're looking at the exports of liquefied natural gas over the last 3-4 months have just spiked here. So we're doing fine. Europeans, not so much. And yet the Biden White House is still behind the scenes telling Zelensky, don't make a deal, don't make a deal, don't make a deal. Of course.
Jeez.
Putin is really winning this thing. And we wouldn't know that from watching our Western media, but Putin's war of attrition is causing this Western alliance to fracture. And there are stories that come out, if you look for them, that the United States, to a degree, but certainly our European allies, are running out of weapons because we're sending them all to Ukraine.
I have it on good authority that there is an inordinate amount of TOW and Stinger missiles that get sent to Poland. And the second they hit the Polish border, no one knows where they go.
Yeah, Interpol and Europol, which is the European counterpart to Interpol, basically saying that there are organized crime syndicates, gangs in Finland now that are showing up with weapons that were intended to be used by the Ukrainian military. So,
well, you know, Russia and China, there were reports probably 7-8 months ago that Russia and China were wanting to come off of the petrodollar, you know, and of course that infuriates the banking cartels that control Western civilization, and as the Ukraine is a dumping ground for all of Western civilization's dirty laundry anyways, so they have to protect their investment, and you gotta protect that Muppet, you know, who used to be an actor, who now is a president of a country that is, you know, a little more than a cracked facade for all of our sins.
Do you think in January any of this will change, or how do you think this whole thing with Ukraine is going to play out?
Yeah.
Your opinion.
I think Russia is going to continue doing what it's doing, which is just slowly grinding away at the Ukrainian military. And it's tragic because the Ukrainian people, regardless of, because I've seen this argument on both sides, Putin is the savior of Western civilization or Christendom. On the other hand, Putin is the Antichrist. Somewhere in between there is the truth. There is no, what's that old song? There ain't no good guy, there ain't no bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
But the Ukrainian people are the ones who are suffering, which is why millions of them have now fled to Romania and Poland and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the approach of the Biden White House and the elites who are pulling his strings, the neocons who are running this show, is that they're going to fight to the last Ukrainian. And that's tragic.
Yeah.
Because the Ukrainian people are not going to get anything out of this deal.
Yeah.
I think Putin, if he's smart, is just going to keep slowly grinding away and using up the weapons reserves of the Western nations and the United States.
Yeah.
And, eventually he'll just settle, I think, for everything east of the Dnieper River, basically the Donbass, which is majority Russian.
Yep.
When you look at how they voted in the last election, the area controlled by Russia right now voted heavily for Yanukovych, the pro-Russian candidate who won the election overall. And of course, he was forced out by a coup that was backed by the West. The very famous Victoria Nuland phone call, F the EU, as to who was going to take over. Petro Poroshenko was the guy who was installed as Yanukovych's successor when he was run out of the country. Now, if we were to put this shoe on the other foot and look at Mexico and say a pro-American president is elected in Mexico, and then China backs a coup that runs him out and installs a pro-Chinese president, and then shortly thereafter, we start finding Chinese weapons showing up in the hands of the Mexican military, that would not play well here in the United States. And we might take energetic measures to put a stop to it. Not defending Putin invading. We're just saying that when we look at these countries, we Americans don't really know much of the local history and how the people get along with one another. We assume Ukraine, they're all Ukrainians. Yeah. Well, no, they're just as divided as we are here in the United States. And just like we here in the Ozarks can't figure out how San Franciscans live the way they do, and they can't figure out how we live the way we do.
Yeah.
People in the eastern and western parts of Ukraine are just as divided.
Yeah.
And what's really ironic and hypocritical for us in the West, Ukraine deserves to be free. Okay, but when this
what does that mean?
Serbia a while back, when the Albanians in Kosovo wanted to be independent and free, we were all in favor of a free and independent Kosovo. So why are we not in favor of a free and independent Donbass when they apparently want to be part of Russia?
Yeah.
It's because it serves our purposes.
Right. Doesn't serve our better interests, our financial interests, and the interest of, as Mike Fisher, the owner of Jardani Jovanovic, points out, that Ukraine is being laundered for the mafia to provide kickback to certain politicians, coffers, who may have participated in a certain upper echelon United States election debacle. That we can't talk about.
That we can't talk about or question or challenge.
Yeah,
and we're not doing that, by the way, algorithm.
Yeah. Oh, no. They went through and they found something I said like 18 months ago and hit us with a strike on our channel.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there's also the report that $2.6 billion of FTX was offloaded by SBF before it tanked. And now there are reports that money is showing up being funneled over there to Ukraine.
Yeah, so, I'm going to talk to Guy Malone about that tomorrow for a future episode of my podcast.
Nice.
To figure out what that's about. What's really curious is that this whole thing is smoke and mirrors. So, some of these crypto exchanges. Again, let's separate Bitcoin out of this. And I'll say again, I'm not a fan. I don't own any Bitcoin, but I understand the motives of people who do. Friends of mine who really studied this, do believe in it, and have invested in Bitcoin. Fine. Again, I'd rather have the dollars in my wallet, physical dollars in my physical wallet, instead of virtual coin in a virtual wallet.
Yeah, sure.
But what I didn't know until this past week, I'd never heard of Tether. I'd heard the term stable coin, which is a cryptocurrency that pegs its value to the value of a more liquid, tangible asset like the US dollar. Tether is one of the most popular stable coins out there. And it turns out that since about 2017, when Tether was launched, and then the FTX was launched around 2019, if I remember correctly, they began exchange. Tether is used basically, or was used for most of the transactions of FTX. You would basically take your US dollars and buy Tether. One Tether is $1, so you exchange for Tether, and then you Tether to buy your whatever, or deposit it with FTX, or buy FTX's token, which is called FTT. It turns out that according to research, as the stories I'm reading here, and I don't know that they've untangled this web yet, but 60% of the tethers in circulation had been purchased by either FTX or FTX's sister company, its trading company, Alameda, which was run by SBF's girlfriend. So, okay, so what is this? And now here's the thing with Tether. Being like a bank, it's supposed to have at least a certain percentage of actual dollars in its reserves,
right?
Because it's supposed to be, again, it's a stable coin. When you buy a Tether, you deposit a US dollar, and they issue you a Tether. You create money,
right? But there has to be liquidity. Liquidity is the term they use. They have to have actual money to give you back if you,
right? And theoretically, Tether is supposed to have as many dollars in reserves as there are tethers in circulation, because you can only get a Tether if you give them $1. But they've never been edited or audited. All right. They've been promising that they would be audited since 2017, when their valuation was like $1 billion or less than $1 billion. But instead, they've been issuing what they call attestations, where they get somebody who's an accountant to certify, yes, I've looked at their books and everything is fine. No audit. It's just, yeah, I've rubber stamped this. And the one time they did that back in 2017, they had to borrow about $360 million, if I remember the story correctly, so they could get that attestation. Now, their valuation then was less than $1 billion. The valuation now is like 700 billion, I think.
Jeez.
So how is this possible? How is it possible that this is? It's kind of the Wild West out there, and I think this may be deliberate.
It's a wealth transfer.
I could be wrong on I could be wrong on the valuation of Tether there, so don't hold me to that. I'm still trying to get my head around this story, but it's the valuation is a lot more now than it was 5 years ago, and they've still not been audited. So that's the point here. Wow. What's surprising is that Tether has not been pulled into bankruptcy by the collapse of FTX, since so many of FTX's transactions were done in this stable coin called Tether. There are questions that Tether, there's some speculation that Tether may be useful to certain three-letter government agencies. In the same way that if you're old enough to remember BCCI back during the first Bush administration.
I don't remember that.
The Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, back in the early 80s, was like one of the 5 or 6 largest banks in the world. And it turned out that it was being used by weapons dealers and drug runners and terrorists and so forth. But the CIA apparently had back doors, and they were kind of watching all the money. So this bank's books were booked, but it was kept afloat because it was useful to the government. Well, there's some speculation here, because there are stories out there going over the last couple of years that Tether is the preferred cryptocurrency of some of those moderate rebels in Syria and other groups that are soliciting for, fundraising. Hey, if you want to give us a donation, you can do it via Tether. All right. Okay. But where's their balance sheet? Where's the audit? Now, there is no audit. There may never be an audit. I'm not accusing anybody of anything here. It's just one of these things that when you get to a certain age, you're just skeptical enough about stuff that just doesn't make sense. Think, okay, it does make sense if you view this a different way. Yeah. Okay. If this was actually a legitimate business, it makes no sense that it's still around. But it could be financing, facilitating certain financial transactions. that certain government agencies want to keep out of the public eye.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what role did FTX play in all of that? I have no idea. I have no idea. This is way beyond me, and especially for not being an expert in cryptocurrency. I can just kind of look at the big picture and say, okay, a lot of smoke here, so I'm betting we can fire.
Well, maybe Guy Malone might be able to give you some insight.
I'm betting he will. Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I kind of want to change gears and jump over to the metaverse. Talk a little bit about the metaverse. I have my own opinions on it, and I don't think anyone's really interested in my opinion on the metaverse. I think it's sinister and evil and everything, but everything seems to be. Yeah, I know. I would like to hear though, Derek, as this technology develops and becomes more invasive, tell us what is there any escaping the metaverse, right? Because it's coming and it's like, I don't want it to. Like, tell us.
Because they're tightening the noose with crypto.
Yeah,
right?
they are.
I mean, they're tightening the noose with crypto. You control the money. What else can you control outside of that? And are we all just going to be watching Ariana Grande in our VR headset, getting our paste, our food paste plugged into our, our Matrix head?
What's so dangerous about it? What's so dangerous about it? And where's this whole thing going?
I think that the metaverse is the goal of godless developers who see it as a way to create a reality that is free from the influence of the creator and the rules of the game that he has created. If you view the natural realm in which we all operate as a game, and God is a game designer, and he's placed us all in here, which gives a whole new kind of meaning to NPCs. We understand that we have to operate according to his rules. So there's some people who don't want to operate according to his rules. Mm-hmm. In fact, looking back through history, in the pages of the Bible, we see that there are certain sons of God, supernatural entities that didn't want to play by his rules either, and decided to try to create their own race to take dominion of this planet God created and then gave to the children of Adam and Eve. Go forth and multiply and take dominion of. I think this is an opportunity. This is a really lame attempt by humans to try to create our own universe free of the restraints of God, and to eliminate then those rules that they find really restrictive. I think this is just an extension of the transhumanist movement, this idea that we can somehow be as gods, that we can overcome death through science, through technology. And so far, the processing power just isn't there. The early efforts by Metaverse, Facebook, just it is really lame.
Lame is the perfect word for it. Yeah.
In fact, there have been articles that have leaked out over the past few weeks that even the developers, even the staff at Meta, don't like using the metaverse. They've basically been ordered by the bosses. You must get in there and use it. It's like, oh.
Yeah, great. I got to put on this headset again.
But I'm actually using this as a plot device. I mean, if you want to think about how this might be fictionalized, the Matrix movies are a good way of kind of envisioning how this might look if it reaches the level that developers want. Although the players in the game would be able to perhaps self-actualize in ways that you can't in the Matrix movies, because the Matrix is kind of, everybody who's in it, most everybody who's in it doesn't realize that they're in it.
Right.
Whereas in the metaverse, if you want wings, if you want to be a different gender, if you want to be a different species, that's all fine. Mm-hmm. I talked about this years ago with the Second Life, which is sort of like the alpha version of what they're trying to create, and showed some video for people who were not aware of this and how this was being sold as an eco-friendly way to bring together staff for meetings. And I pointed out that in one of the videos from the Second Life website, apparently this gentleman here has decided to attend the meeting as the Kool-Aid guy.
Oh, yes. I remember those Wild West days.
So he was the Kool-Aid guy in this staff meeting. He's like, well, okay, probably not a wise career move, but whatever. But this is where it is going. What's really startling is that here we are 15 years on from that, and Metaverse is not really much more advanced than what happened in Second Life, years ago. But there are people who are betting a lot of money on it. Obviously, Facebook pumped a lot of money into it, and it's not coincidental that earliest investors in Facebook were connected to the intelligence community. It wasn't
Interesting.
it wasn't the CIA's venture capital division, which name is escaping me at the moment. CIA's got its own venture capital firm that invests in technologies that they think will be useful to the intelligence community. But there were people who had long histories of being connected with the IC who were early investors in Facebook. Peter Thiel was an early investor in Facebook, and of course, not also co-founder of PayPal, but he's now the head of Palantir, which is the company that looks at social media.
Oh yes,
yeah, Palantir, the Steam.
Palantir, yeah, Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
Yeah, they're not even trying anymore.
Right? Yeah, we see everything and we'll tell you what it means.
Yeah.
But moving in that direction is probably where they would like to get us. A lot of people would, I think, prefer to live in a reality, change their circumstances rather than engaging with the physical realm around us. And I think that's tragic, but that is probably where it's going. And the novel I'm working on is using this as a plot device. That I think ultimately the question comes down to how powerful could something like this be if it is really, really immersive, where you really believe that you're in the scene, this virtual reality.
Yeah.
What does that do to your spirit? What does it do to your soul? I mean, if you're participating, for example, in a virtual human sacrifice, okay, how does that affect you? Sharon's written about this in the past. She wrote a chapter on this for God's Ghostbusters, an anthology Tom Horn published about 10 years ago. Your soul on virtual sin, I think, or something to that effect was the title. Could this be used as a portal for spirits, call them demons, to access us while our guard is down?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
As storytellers, you guys know the power of a good narrative and how we can be drawn in through fiction to stories that are telling a story that we would reject if we were reading it as nonfiction. For example, Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code. All right, that's basically just repackaged Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Yep.
A nonfiction book from several years earlier. Yep. Where a lot of people read that book, myself included, and read, okay, this is.
Yeah. So like, okay, you're trying a little hard, buddy.
Yeah. This is really bogus. But when he packaged it in an exciting story, suddenly you've got thousands of people showing up at Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Where's the Grail?
It's Indiana Jones. It's Tom Hanks. There's a hot chick. There's Gandalf. There's
A good story will bypass our innate skepticism.
Absolutely.
And so if you're drawn into a totally immersive environment in the metaverse, and faced with situations like this, how will that affect the souls of the people who go in there, especially if they're kids whose frontal lobes are not yet fully developed?
Yeah. Well, it's even the conversation has been happening, weirdly enough, a lot longer than any of us realized with first-person shooters. You want to talk about vicarious living, and I'm a classic example of someone who's guilty of that. You can be Master Chief, you can be Ghost, you can be Captain Price, you can be, McTavish, you can be all these cool people, and you can save the world, every time. And there's a great game that addresses this vicarious living. It's called Spec Ops: The Line. And it came out like maybe 15 years ago. It's like old PlayStation 2 or Xbox or whatever, but it kind of addresses this aspect of like vicarious living, where you can find it on Steam or whatever, but it's a traditional like third person shooter. You're in Dubai after a sandstorm, you and your buddies and your special forces, and like as the game progresses, you're like descending deeper and deeper into hell until by the very end, the villain of the story, voiced by Bruce Boxleitner from Babylon. I'll remember him from Babylon 5,
Right.
But at the end, he tells your guy, the hero who you've been vicariously saving everybody through. He's like, What have you done? You have made everything worse. If you would have just stopped, if you would have just basically, if you would have just turned the game off, you would have prevented all of this suffering, you know, in your vainglorious attempt to be the hero. But you just had to be the hero, you know. And it's amazing that there was someone who was like, who had that 30,000 foot view as a developer to make a game addressing this 15 years ago, and no one knows about it. Like, no one pays any attention to it, because that's one of the big things, is that like vicarious living. You step into this world and you can be anything you want to be, Neo. Right? You can look however you want. You can know kung fu.
The new series on and in fact I got to watch the new episode tonight. It's on Amazon Prime. The Peripheral, which is it's based on a William Gibson novel, so it's kind of trippy science fiction. It's similar to that, in which the protagonist is a young girl living in rural North Carolina with her brother, who's a Marine Corps veteran who's been upgraded with what they call haptics. Basically, he's been enhanced like he's a super soldier. He and his buddies. And in this virtual world, and this is produced by the guys who did Westworld.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well done. They're
Okay, Phil,
invited
God bless,
by
mate. Thanks for dropping
a
in.
developer, a new game developer, to beta test a new headset that drops them into a really realistic virtual reality. So I've been watching this as kind of research for what I'm writing, and turns out this girl, early 20s, mid 20s, whatever, is actually better in the games than her brother, the Marine. So they're getting paid to beta test this new headset that drops them into this virtual reality, but then it turns into like sort of a timey-wimey sort of thing where not a game. They're through entangled pairs. They're actually interacting with a future, and somebody in the future who's and it really gets weird from there. But the bottom line is, what is reality, and what can you be convinced to do if you think that what you're doing is not real? Again, what is the impact? What are the spiritual impacts for you and your soul when you're engaging in this this virtual realm? The prequel series to Battlestar Galactica, the rebooted Battlestar Galactica, they came out with a short-lived series called Caprica. Oh yeah, chronicled the development of the Cylons. I was going to say the Toasters. That was a nickname for them. The Cylons. And it began with an immersive VR game and a headset that brought people into this virtual reality. And of course, hackers got into it, and they set up sort of an out of the game section of the reality where you could go in and do whatever you wanted. And the very first episode showed them at this rave inside a warehouse type club. And there was a human sacrifice going on. Now, again, this is in VR, so it's not real. This person's not really dying. And they skipped over this so quickly. It was like in passing. There's this character they show for just a few moments, and you see her face changing every few seconds. And the one girl says to her friend who's in this game with her, "Who's that?" "Oh, that's Hecate, goddess of the dead." Wait, what? And they never came back to it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what led to this whole thing that I'm working on for this novel. But this, I think, is the direction that developers will try to go, and I think they'll find a willing audience for it if they can boost the processing up so that the experience is closer to reality. And I hate to say this, but it will probably be the porn industry that achieves the breakthrough.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's what, for obvious reasons.
Yep.
That was actually what you're talking about was a plot point in the Third Heavenly Realms novel, Sturm und Drang, which takes place around the time of the flood, with Nephilim. And there's a part where one of the main characters actually has like a battle with Leviathan after the flood, like once, deep underwater. And the guy like fights off one of the Nephilim constructs, the human animal hybrids that they, probably created. And the faithful angel realizes as he's communicating telepathically with Leviathan that like, oh, that was your plan all along. Because if you can create a system that is, just like you say, Derek, outside of God's rules, then guess what? Just like Wilford Brimley, old Diabetes said, you'll never grow old and you'll never die. You know, if you never die, you never have to answer to God for anything that you do.
Yeah.
So as long as you are immortal, even in this construct, then, or if you can, Elon Musk style, upload your consciousness into an AI, then you'll never die and you never have to answer to God, and you can effectively be your own God in a false construct. You know?
Yeah, and that actually sounds like hell to me.
It does, right?
Living forever in an unregenerate state.
Separated from God.
Right, and separated from God. God did Adam and Eve a favor when he said, okay, you're going to have to leave the garden, and oh yes, you and all your descendants will have to suffer physical death. Our spirits
bring you back.
Yeah, our spirits don't die. We do live forever. It's just most people who have rejected the word of God don't understand that fact. And we're all eternal beings. It's just where are you going to spend eternity?
Right.
So you're right. They want to put that up. They want to avoid the rule. Sharon is writing about this in her Red Wing Saga series. And again, I'm just blessed that she's letting me borrow some of her characters and bring them into the present day.
That's such a cool idea, by the way, that you two are overlapping a little bit.
There'll be some people who'll be very excited. For some people who caught some of the Easter eggs in my last novel, The God Conspiracy, name dropped a few things relating to her novels, but I also sort of name dropped and hinted at, folks like Tom Horn and Steve Quayle.
Nice.
But they want to break out of this prison of time into which they've been locked. God is outside of time. For him, he's not just everywhere, he's every when. And we all experience time in linear fashion. And so one of the things that they're trying to do in her Red Wing Saga novel is break out of this prison of time because they feel it's unfair. In the same way that in the Battlestar Galactica series, there's a really, really great scene with Dean Stockwell, who plays Cavil, one of the most evil and powerful of the Cylon models, talking about how he hated being restricted to the physical form that the creators of the Cylons had locked him into. He wanted to be free to, ride the waves of a supernova and taste colors and so on and so on. And he hated his creator for locking him in. And Sharon and I, we saw that scene. This is, I don't know, 10 years ago now. Boy, we're like, that's why these angels have rebelled. They've been locked into, certainly they can move between dimensions that we humans can't, but they are still locked into experiencing time in linear fashion.
Yeah. That was at the end of Empyrean falling, that was like one of the pronouncements of judgment, was that like, you're going to be condemned to Earth, which, you both covet and now despise because you think humans are squatters. But you're going to be denied the power to actually physically do anything. So it's just the ultimate temptation. You're going to be locked into this. You're going to be a ghost in the mansion that you covet, basically. And there's a lot of torment there for them to not be able to have that full, external dimension biotapestry of reality that God has created.
And now they're drawing their human followers into a cheap copy of that through the metaverse.
And it is a cheap copy. You know what's fascinating too? You mentioned Dean Stockwell. I kept thinking, why do I know that name? He's the Quantum Leap guy, not the main guy, but he's not Ziggy, but
the guy with the mustache,
and the cigar, Quantum Leap. So we can talk about that one too.
Yeah, Dean Stockwell was awesome.
Yeah, great actor. So the metaverse, crypto, all these things that you don't think, no one really knows how we're going to escape this. Thank the Lord that, we have God on our side and that there is a life, and an existence beyond this trap that is being sprung on us. Derek, do you think that seeing as we've kind of entered a new age here, per the whole great conjunction that you talked about a couple years ago, do you think that America has any real chance of reclaiming her former glory or sovereignty?
Not at all.
No, and I think that's because those who've got the money to influence things at the very highest levels will be working for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the people of the United States, the people of who actually live here. Yeah, again, it's elite capture, but it's not all the Chinese who are, doing the elite capture tricks. I think the spirit realm is doing the same thing, and they'll be looking out for themselves. I think the United States is reaching its sell-by date.
Yeah.
Date is coming up soon. When you look at history, you look at the great nations, the great empires of history. They seem to last 2, 3, 4 centuries, and then that's it. We may have another 100 years, but I doubt it. I doubt the United States makes it to 2100 if the Lord doesn't come here before then. But I don't think the United States makes it out of this century as a single political unit. I think,
I agree.
We here in the Ozarks, and I know people in the South and in the Appalachians are looking at people on the coast, the coastal elites, is like, what's wrong with you people? And that's like people in San Francisco or New York who look out here in the Ozarks and like, how can you people live there? There's no Starbucks in walking distance. Yeah. Praise God.
Right.
I think things are going to have to split. And we're going to find ourselves as 2, maybe 3 or more.
We're already seeing it. I mean, we're already seeing balkanization, right? We've had here in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, we've seen hundreds of thousands of people from California alone in the last couple of years come here.
Yeah.
And interestingly,
and I can't send them back on boxcars as much as I want to.
Well, here's the thing, though. During the
I don't have the credit rating for it.
And they're, everything is congested. We're getting crammed and everything. We're all complaining about all these people from California coming. Don't California my Tennessee. And then the election came along last month, or this month, I guess it's still. And Tennessee voted more red than it's ever voted in its history.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they all came here for that reason. The concentration is getting stronger. And the pockets are becoming more concentrated towards one side or the other.
We're seeing the same thing here in Missouri, where up until recently, we generally would flip back and forth between a Democrat governor and a Republican governor, and we'd split, sometimes 2 Democrats in the Senate, sometimes 1 and 1. After McCaskill was beat by Josh Hawley in the last election, this time around, Eric Schmidt really didn't have a problem with the Democrat challenger. I don't see Missouri electing a Democrat senator anytime soon, even though we've got 2 fairly good-sized Democrat-controlled cities on our coasts, St. Louis and Kansas City. The rest of the state is very, very conservative and getting more so. So, we're seeing it. Having lived for 4 years in Southern Illinois and learning why, which I didn't understand growing up in Chicago, why the people south of Interstate 80 really didn't like Chicago. I saw it with my own eyes, traveling around the southern 2/3 of the state. Southern Illinois would be happy to secede from the rest of Illinois. We're seeing this with the initiative, the vote initiatives in the ballot initiatives in Eastern Washington to join Iowa. There are parts of California that would love to split and leave Southern California to its own devices. So, this, I think, is going to repeat around the country, and we're going to wind up falling out with the United States as 2 or 3, maybe 4 separate nations. And that makes me sad because I've got ancestors who took a gamble and came here, some of them as early as the 1630, late 1630. So they've been here through a lot of stuff over the last 400 years on this this continent. But we got to remember as Christians not to be distracted by that, because our citizenship is first and foremost in a kingdom. And our responsibilities and our loyalties are to that kingdom.
Amen to that. Amen to that. You have a trip coming up.
Speaking of loyalties to the kingdom.
Talk about your upcoming trip, and what sites are you especially excited to see or return to?
In fact, we just talked with Lipkin Tours today about this. We're going to Israel in late March and early April of 2023. We'll be there from March 19th through about April 3rd. The last few days is an optional extension over into Jordan. But Sharon and I are actually going a few days early on our own. And,
cool.
Praise God and bless Aaron and Eddie Lipkin Tours for flying us out a few days early and putting us up for a few days. We plan to visit a few sites on our own that are not on the tour. Aaron is coming with us because he's an archaeology geek like we are, and he, like us, loves showing how the archaeology, the stones are crying out, validating the history that's in the Bible.
That's true.
So we're going to go into the north because we've been doing some research recently. Just I would say stumbled across this, but I think was kind of nudged this way. It's like, hey, Derek, look at this, and found some research connected to the book of First Enoch.
Okay.
Really?
And the Essenes. Now, the Essenes, I always thought until just recently that all of the Essenes were at Qumran, where the Dead Scrolls were found, which is east of Jerusalem on the, overlooking the Dead Sea. It turns out that wasn't the case. There were Essene communities in Jerusalem and also in the north near the Sea of Galilee, specifically near the town of Magdala, which is where Mary Magdalene is from. The book of First Enoch is broken into several sections which were written at different periods of history. And the first 36 chapters, the Book of the Watchers, describes in detail the sin of those sons of God who came down, mated with human women, taught us stuff we weren't supposed to know, and then how they were punished. Beginning at chapter 37 through chapter 71 is what scholars call the Book of Parables. And I didn't know until just a couple of months ago that, and I should have, because Mike Heiser's written a book on this, his Reader's Companion to the Book of Enoch, Volume 2, that in there are certain concepts and phrases that don't appear in any other Jewish writing until the New Testament. Really? So now the book of First Enoch, the first 36 chapters, Book of the Watchers, probably written by about 250 BC. The next chunk, the Book of Parables, written by about the end of the 1st century BC, toward the end of the life of Herod the Great. So before, or just before, the birth of Jesus and the birth of John the Baptist. And because no copies of the Book of Parables was found at Qumran, it is assumed by scholars, this seems to be the consensus, that it was written by this northern group of Galilean Essenes, who in their little enclave there in the hills called Mount Arbel, just west of the village of Magdala, you can see Mount Hermon in the distance on the northern horizon. You can also see the whole northern shoreline of the Sea of Galilee, including Capernaum, where Jesus based his ministry later. Right. So they wrote this book of parables, which describes this messianic character called the Son of Man. Now, we who are familiar with the New Testament know, okay, that's a term that Jesus applied to himself a lot. And it's always been assumed that it comes out of Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel sees next to the Ancient of Days one like a Son of Man. Right. But that's not a title, that's a description. It's one like a human. Because Ezekiel, throughout the book of Ezekiel, is referred to by the angel with him as, okay, look at this, Son of Man. He's not being called the Messiah. He's just saying, human one, watch this. Okay, now see this. But in the book of parables, 1st century BC, prior to the birth of Jesus, this title, the Son of Man, emerges as a messianic figure, one who will return to earth and bring justice, punish the sinful angels, punish the wicked kings and wicked landowners who are oppressing the people. This is not anywhere in the Old Testament. Neither is the idea that, that there would be a place of punishment for the sinful angels. I mean, that comes from First Enoch, the first 36 chapters. Again, that's not anywhere in the Old Testament, but this is part of the New Testament. The other thing, too, is John the Baptist saying, oh, yes, we can have a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. Now, this would have been anathema to the Essenes at Qumran, who believe you have to follow all of their very rigid rules for forgiveness. But the Essenes in the north were a little different. And John the Baptist comes out and he's preaching this baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. That is not an Old Testament concept. That is Book of Enoch concept that suddenly John the Baptist is preaching, and then Jesus is validating, and then validating this title, the Son of Man, referring to himself more than 80 times as the Son of Man. It's like, wow, wait a minute now. So if the Book of Enoch only emerged in the few centuries between Malachi and Matthew, maybe those silent years weren't as silent as we thought. And then you start looking at the geology or the geography of where all this took place. and the fact that this is all on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And then we go back to what we have discussed previously about John the Baptist baptizing at Bethany across the Jordan, which is actually from the Greek Bethania or Batania, Bashan, across the Jordan. It was all north of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus' first disciples, John sees him, behold the Lamb of God, and then the next day Jesus is there calling his disciples, Peter, Philip, Andrew, Nathaniel, all from Bethsaida, north of the Sea of Galilee. This idea that Jesus was baptized down near Jericho, no. He was in the north because Bashan in the ancient world was covered with these megalithic tombs, these megalithic monuments for the cult of the dead, including one that looks like Gilgal Rephaim, about a mile north of the Sea of Galilee. So long way around, I'm getting to some of these sites we're going to see. This place called Khirbet Betahah. It's less than half a mile from the ancient site of Bethsaida. It's concentric rings around a central tomb, a dolmen that was covered by a cairn, overlooking the Jordan River. It's about a third the size of Gilgal Rephaim, which is about 500 feet across. This is about 150 feet across. But it's overlooking the Jordan River. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if that was where John the Baptist was baptizing? And then up in the hill here, just, okay, we're down in the river here, up the hill there's a megalithic structure for the cult of the dead. And then when he gets arrested, Jesus, according to Matthew, moves to Capernaum so that what was written by the prophet Isaiah would be fulfilled. Those dwelling in the region of the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. So, yes, we're going to go there. We're going to go to Gilgal Rephaim. We're going to go to the Serpent Mound of Bashan, which is that serpent-shaped ridge a quarter of a mile north of Gilgal Rephaim. And we plan to visit a site called Bet Yarah, which is means temple or house of the moon god, which is very close to the baptismal site most Christians go to now. It's just south of the Sea of Galilee. This goes back probably 5,000 years as a settlement. The Hurrians or the Horites of the Bible settled here around 2300 BC and brought with them this idea that you had to dig a ritual pit to summon spirits from the netherworld. But there's a megalithic monument that was discovered just offshore from Bet Yarah about 10 years ago. That's even bigger than Gilgal Rephaim. It's got 60,000 tons of stone.
Jeez. Whoa.
And it's under about 30 foot of water. It was because of earthquakes over the centuries. The water level of the Sea of Galilee has went up and down. It wasn't underwater at the time they built it, but just to give you an idea how much stone that is, Stonehenge, they estimate about 25,000 tons.
Wow.
1,000 tons of stone, probably going back 6,000 years, if this is about the same age as Gilgal Rephaim. And nobody knows why it's there. So there's an archaeologist who's written a paper on this, connecting it to one of the Ugaritic myths, one of the Canaanite myths from the time of the Judges. And he's also excavated at Gilgal Rephaim, at that serpent mound next to Gilgal Rephaim, and at that other site overlooking the Jordan River. So we're planning to meet him while we're out there and shoot video, make a documentary. There's a lot of really, really cool stuff over there. But when you look at the map of the dolmens, these megalithic tombs, they are just so. I mean, the ancient kingdom of Og of Bashan was one big necropolis. It was a giant cemetery. It was literally believed to be the entrance to the netherworld, and that's where Jesus began his ministry. And then he went to the foot of Mount Hermon, the Grotto of Pan, and asked Peter, "Who do you say I am?"
Man, that's awesome.
It's awesome.
I bet you're excited. You know, I never realized that about.
Hearing about it, man.
Oh yeah, man. That'd be so cool to go. Oh my gosh.
What's the biggest piece of luggage you got, Derek?
We've got dates for 2024 now.
Okay.
Awesome.
We will probably we've made this trip with 2 carry-on sized suitcases.
Okay. So you got basically what I'm asking is, do you have one that could maybe accommodate a 6'2", 240 pound, maybe a 5'7", sort of svelte 220 pound individual?
Well, I didn't know that about John the Baptist. I always thought it was, he was baptizing in the Jordan, that stretched between
you
the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Just outside of Jerusalem. I just always assumed. But that's really interesting you say that, and that's one thing that I really like about Derek is that he really challenges all of these assumptions that we have based on just traditional sites. Traditional because institutions said so, not because that there is any real hard archaeological evidence.
Right.
And one example of that is one thing that Derek talked about in his book about the traditional site of Calvary.
Oh yeah.
And folks, and L.A. Marzulli did a video recently where he's at the traditional side of Calvary, and it kind of looks like
I mean, he's right here.
I know, but you differ.
I do it all the time.
But you differ. Like, tell us about that. Like, how do you? It's a different. Tell us where you think the traditional site is and why you think that is the case.
We had the benefit of really the blessing of going there back in 2019 with Rabbi Zev Porat, Messianic rabbi, who will be with us again this coming tour. And he showed us a site on the Mount of Olives, which he believes is the site of the crucifixion. And independently, when I was writing The Second Coming of Saturn, I came across research that led me to conclude that Zeb is probably right, that the site inside the old city, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, can't be correct. I mean, the Gospels tell us that he was buried in the same place in the garden where he was crucified. And then there are scholars who've worked on this, like E.L. Martin and others, who have shown that Pilate back in the day would have wanted to make an example. The Romans would have wanted to make an example of anybody that they believed was a threat to their power. And of course, that's how this was sold to Pilate by the Sanhedrin, by making him a public example. So they put him on the highest place where travelers coming into the city would have been able to see him. And the road leading from Bethany to the gate they would have used coming into the eastern side of Jerusalem went right below there on the Mount of Olives. So I think there's something more to it, though, than just this being the Romans wanting to choose a really obvious place to execute who, in their mind, was a political problem. The Mount of Olives, that is, was a site that, going back to the time of Solomon, had been called by the priests the Mount of Corruption, because he put a high place there for Molech, Milcom, the chief god of the Ammonites. The Hebrews called him Molech. And when I was looking at the Hebrew, I realized there was a problem there, because the definite article ha, which is the in English, is part of the name, har ha mashkith. So is that what Mount of the Corruption? We, thanks to being able to search with electronic Bibles, you find that there is another reference to ha mashkith. Two other references, in fact, in the Bible, and that term elsewhere in Scripture means the destroyer, Mount of the Destroyer, which kind of fit with the theory that I was working with, the thesis that this entity, Molech, called El by the Canaanites, Saturn by the Romans, was Shemiyaza, the leader of the rebellion in Genesis 6, but also the destroyer of Revelation 9, Abaddon, or Apollyon, Mount of the Destroyer. Oh, okay. Well, what else happened there? So you start looking through the narrative of Jesus' movements during the last week of his life, and he basically divided his time between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. He was teaching in the temple, of course, and healing, but then he'd go to the Mount of Olives. Prior to that final week, he had raised Lazarus from the dead there, which was kind of a signal. But then he gave the Olivet Discourse, where he related his longest teaching on what would happen in the last days, the end times, right there on the Mount of Olives, the Mount of the Destroyer, the place that formerly had a temple for Molech on the summit. He was betrayed there in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was arrested there. He was crucified there. He was buried there in the garden where he was crucified. He descended, according to Peter, into the abyss where he proclaimed the prisoners. And this would refer to those spirits who were thrust down to Tartarus, according to 2 Peter 2 and Jude 6 and 7. Those would be the spirits, the sons of God from Genesis 6. And then he was
Cat stood on the remote. Sorry, guys.
And then he was resurrected from there. That's where he was. There, he was crucified there. He was buried there in the garden where he was crucified. He descended, according to Peter.
What's it like? Always knowing the truth.
I could just tell.
When anyone is lying.
From the creator of Knives Out.
Peter into the abyss where he proclaimed the prisoners, and this would refer to those spirits who were thrust down to Tartarus, according to 2 Peter 2 and Jude 6 and 7. Those would be the spirits, the sons of God from Genesis 6. And then he was resurrected from there. That's where he was seen. And according to Luke, that's where he was caught up in heaven from Bethany. And according to Zechariah 4, he's going to just return there, and it will split in half. So the Mount of Olives is a lot of significance spiritually.
Yeah.
But Zeb took it a step further when he said Golgotha, usually translated for us in English as place of the skull. It really means place of a skull. But whose skull? When you go back into the Old Testament, you see that when David finally took Jerusalem from the Jebusites, he brought the head of Goliath with him.
Bingo,
It's not the
baby.
place of the skull. It is the place of Goliath's skull.
Yeah.
Because David took it with him to Jerusalem. Zeb believes that he buried it on that high place there, the Mount of Olives. Solomon was convinced to put high places there for Molech, also Chemosh and Astarte. Which, think of the height of hubris, because it's 200 feet higher than the Temple Mount. Every time the priests opened the doors of Solomon's temple, they'd look up to the Mount of Olives and see the temple for Molech up there.
Yeah.
But Jesus, in that final week of his life, basically laid out, here's what's going to happen in the last days. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Oh, there's that phrase again, the Son of Man.
Yeah.
And then descended, declared victory, resurrected from there. And when he comes back, it's going to be right there on the Mount of Olives again. So, yeah, we're looking forward to getting back to Israel, because when we go to the Mount of Olives this time, I didn't understand any of this back in 2019. So we're looking forward to going back and really having the opportunity to just look, people, this
It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense that it would be on the Mount of Olives, where he was crucified and buried and will come back.
Many of those traditional sites, God bless her, Constantine's mother Helena meant well, but you could just imagine some of these guys. Oh we got the real cross right over here.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Over here.
Look, real nails. These
Yeah.
are real nails.
These are good
Yeah,
nails.
I saw some of those real nails and a piece of wood from the real cross when I went to Rome. They had it behind the church, and the Church of the Holy Cross or something, and a little shrine in the back with these
Church of the
relics.
whatever.
Church of the whatevs. But that's man, that is awesome. I'm excited for you to go back, and I'd love to go on that Jordanian extension of the trip too, because I'm interested in like Edom and Seir, going to Petra. I still can't wrap my head around what Petra is and why it's there and who are the but
It is mind-blowing.
that's why I want to go with Derek.
Well, but I'll tell you, when you come out of that Seek, which is that chasm that you have to go through, it's about 1.25 miles, and suddenly you walk through the end there, and you're back in the sunlight, and you see the treasury ahead of you, which is from the movie, that's where they put the Holy Grail. It is impossible to describe, and seeing it in the movie theater is impressive, but when you're surrounded by it, it's just indescribable. And then when you go down into the city and you see that you go to the colonnaded street, and you get to the back of that area, and you realize, okay, this here was the temple of their chief god Dushara, and we believe, thanks to the work of a Canadian historian by the name of Dan Gibson, that that temple, Dushara, with the big cube in the forecourt, was the site of the original Kaaba. So we think Petra was far more spiritually important than it's been given credit for. We think, yeah. Well, we planned for a while. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. We plan to write a book someday called Decoding Petra, because we think there's a good chance that we can make a case that Petra was Mount Sinai, that the rock that Moses split is that Sikh. Sorry.
Really?
I mean, think about it. That I know there are some friends of ours like Joel Richardson who believe it was Jebel Allah, and you got that rock on the top that's split.
Mm-hmm.
But you got water. You got to water like what? A couple million people plus flocks and herds.
Yep.
Yeah.
To this day, that dry river that comes out of the Sikh is called the Wadi Musa, the Wadi of Moses.
Yeah.
And if you really want to see something interesting, just Google sometime flood Petra and watch the videos of tourists running for their lives when they get a heavy rain there in Jordan, because it fills up with water and people are being washed out of that Sikh. So I think there's a good chance that in fact was the original Petra, which means if that was where Moses, or rather Muhammad, was motivated to create his false religion, again, it's sacred geography, sacred territory.
Yeah.
If that was where God gave the law to Moses, and then Muhammad went there to establish another, and if that is in fact the place where Israel will be hidden in the last days, the remnant will be hidden in the desert. There are those who believe that Petra will be that place. I think there's some really interesting stuff there, but I encourage people who've never heard this idea before that that was the original Mecca. Look up the work of Dan Gibson and his documentary called The Sacred City, which is available on Amazon Prime. The Sacred City. He's convinced us.
Okay. Very cool. And then this trip, when are you guys going?
March 19th through April 3rd of 2023, and then we'll be back there in 2024, also in the spring.
Okay.
We went in May last time in 2019, and I nearly passed out several times because they had a heat wave, and I don't handle the heat as well as I used to.
Man, that's awesome. Well, Derek, tell people where they can find you, where your latest. Of course, I mean, A View from the Bunker is fantastic. Where can they find you?
Well, really, the hub is gilberthouse.org. My website is derekbgilbert.com, but you can get there from gilberthouse.org, and we've got links there to basically everything we do. And we're bringing back our original podcast, PID Radio, which stands for Peering into Darkness. We just released an episode of that, audio only, but we're kind of old school. We're just realizing that the amount of time it takes to create video, because we've got two programs, Sci Friday and Unraveling Revelation. Sci Friday is going to go on hiatus at the end of the year.
Okay.
Because producing 30 minutes of video and having to make sure it times out exactly to 28 minutes and 30 seconds for network, it takes probably 5 times more time to produce a 30-minute episode than it takes us to do an hour of audio. And we can cover so many more topics on PID Radio. So that was the podcast we started back in 2005. So it is coming back, and you can get to that from gilberthouse.org, and then download our app, because that gets you all of our content.
Yes,
very cool.
Absolutely. Couple things before we let you go, Derek. One, wanted to ask you real quick. Do you think, and this will be sort of for our Patreon only, we're going to excise this from the live stream. Do you think that the gender fluid movement, the transsexual movement, the gender confusion that's going on is going to sort of lead into human-animal hybrids and eventually dovetail into that whole Elon Musk digital immortality slippery slope that we've been talking about?
I think it's part and parcel of the transhumanist movement, this idea that we can recreate ourselves in our own image.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to understand that word image in the context of Genesis doesn't mean that God looks like we look. He's not a biped standing about 6 feet tall. We are his image bearers. We are his moral agents on this earth. That's what that means, to be created in God's image. But the transhumanists really want to create a new species in their own image.
Yeah.
They don't want to bear God's image. They want to be his image bearer, carry his flag, his banner into the battle anymore. We want to carry our own banner.
Mm-hmm.
And the metaverse, which we talked about previously, is part of this as well, because if you just plug yourself in, it's really hard from a biological perspective. Scientists who have looked at what they want to do biologically, this idea that we are just hardware for the software program running between our ears, and we can swap parts like Mr. Potato Head, is just, that's stupid. It doesn't work like that. The body does not work like that. And they're finding this now. They're starting finally to recognize that kids who've been chemically castrated years ago are dealing with other health issues because our bodies are not meant to be tinkered with in this way.
Yeah.
I just saw a story this past week, which is really disturbing, in Vox, about people who believe they're the wrong gender. And they very euphemistically refer to this as bottom surgery. It sounds so much nicer than, you know, castration.
And mutilation.
Mutilation, which is really what it is. There are a growing number of people who want both sets of genitalia. They want to be surgically created hermaphrodites. This gets back to the influence of the goddess Inanna. This is so illogical, both intellectually and biologically, that it's spiritual. It has to be. And we go back and look at who this entity was, Inanna or Ishtar in the ancient world. She was praised in Sumerian hymns that we have today. They've been preserved thanks to the dry sands of ancient Iraq. These texts still exist for being able to transform men into women and women into men. And
wow,
you can have 2 mommies and 2 daddies, and it's perfectly fine. Join the army.
Right. Or, you know, 57 flavors of gender.
Yeah. You can choose what you want to be.
Exactly. It is about rejecting what God created and called good. As Jesus said, have you not read, from the beginning created he them male and female. And this is what the transhumanist or transhumanist and transgender movement is trying to reject.
G'day, Vast Thinker. Welcome back to the channel, mate.
Absolutely. Wow. Derek, we always love having you. Before we let you go, one last thing. I got a Bible dad joke for you. You mentioned the Karen stone north of the Jordan. Do you think who do you think the Karen complains to? Do you think it's the Nephilim or the Watchers? Karen. Where's Gabe when I need him with a bum 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 bum? It was a good dad joke.
Dad jokes by their very nature.
Yeah. Right. Don't tell that joke when you're over there. They might not like. They might put you in jail or something. Get straight to jail. Derek Gilbert, we love you. We thank you so much for coming on to talk about the beast and the metaverse and crypto and everything. We wish you safe travels when you go to Israel, and we can't wait to have you back, buddy. Thank you.
Love it. Always enjoy talking to you guys.
No,
you too. You have a great night, and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. Yeah, we probably won't talk to you again until the new year.
Hey, guys, I don't know how good this next guy is. I'm not sure. If he's no good, I've got something else to back it up. So just bear with me. I don't think this guy's a Christian, but he's interested in all the things because I've seen him on the Goslings channel. That's what I just done. Okay, let's see how we go.
The story of Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh.
I've got an itch I can't scratch, I'm missing a piece that completes a whole part of me, an open wound scar to see. Everybody come here, gather round, welcome to the freak show, the best in town. What the hell's wrong with me? I don't get along with anybody, honestly. I've been living in my own head, constantly thoughts jumbled around, think I need a new lobotomy. Wait, all these thoughts are too negative. I don't want to get lost in the sedative. Gotta show them what I got, I'm competitive. You know I'm about to go off, I won't let it win, I'll take a stab. I want to chase the bag, I want to weigh, I can change all the things I lack. I gotta face the facts, I gotta taste the knack. I'll be obsessed with the rest, I got an itch to scratch.
and welcome to the Creepy Little Book. It's a show with a focus on the fringe and mysterious, everything from the esoteric to the extraterrestrial, the spiritual to the supernatural, and all that lies between. I'm your humble host, Pete, a simple master of mysteries,
Oh, you sound humble, mate.
antiquary of the arcane, or perhaps just a weirdo in the dark. Your mileage may vary, but I ask you, esteemed viewer, please give me 1 hour to regale you with tales both strange and bold. Then make up your mind. Tonight's going to be a good one. We have in front of us the biblical giants, and when they ruled the antediluvian world. Oh yes. But before we begin, allow me
Okay, you'll settle down, guys, and stop being an idiot. You watch.
a moment to say thank you to our live chat moderator right here on YouTube, Tina Tomaszewski. Shout out to Tina. Thanks for being here. Thank you for holding it down in the chat for us tonight. Much appreciation for your contribution to this community. And speaking of this community, seeing a lot of familiar faces tonight.
Yeah, okay, guys. Like I said, I hadn't seen that before, so I wasn't impressed. So we'll do LA Missouri, Saved from the New Age.
And the Orlando Prophecy Summit that we're going to have lots of speakers again, as always, and great entertainment options and other things. So just want to know that you're invited. So LA, always good to have you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here, Mono.
You know, that we were thinking that since you're in town and that this would be a great time really to kind of get an insight into the Missouri mind. I mean, I've known you since 2014. So, you know, I know 13.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of the background here, but I think just what I find fascinating is how God has used you in your history, where he's brought you, again, from the time before you were a believer, and how he's taken those interests that you have and really the experiences that you've had and used them for.
Okay, guys, I'll come back to that. I'd rather do this one. It takes us right to 3 hours.
Welcome Gary Wayne to the show. Gary, how you doing?
Very good, thanks. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me to your show. Looking forward to a very hopefully interesting conversation that your viewers are going to talk about for a while.
Absolutely, I have no doubt of that. I've been looking forward to this this a lot too. And I want to, for the audience, I want to hold up your book. Thank you again for sending this. It's an excellent book. Let me make sure I can get this in the shot here. Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Excellent book. It's thick. There's a lot of good information here, but it's broken up in a way. The chapter, there's almost 100 chapters, but they're shorter, so it's easy to digest. Those are the kinds of books I like to read because you know, a lot of times having kids and doing everything I do, I only have a few minutes at a time to read. So it's nice to be able to sit down for 10 minutes and be able to read a chapter or two. Yeah, I really love the book. I'm not through the whole thing yet, but everything that I've read is just excellent work.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I think you'll find that this book just doesn't stop coming at you. It is loaded with information in every chapter, right through to the end chapter. So, and anything that you're reading in the beginning of the book, it's going to come up in the last part of the book as well.
Good deal. And it's on a topic that, you know, since I got into this, the Nephilim, the Genesis 6 giants, that was what really brought me into this, you know, everything that I do. And it's easy for us, I think, sometimes to think, the people who are in this thing, to think that we've already heard everything there is to know about the Nephilim and all that. But then comes along an author like you to prove all that wrong. And that's what I love. There's still a lot of exciting things to learn about Genesis 6 and at least 800 pages full of stuff. So that's great. Before we get into that, though, for those who might not be familiar with you or your work, could you give us a rundown of your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today?
Well, it's kind of interesting, and I know, Josh, you're a prophecy buff, and so are probably so many of your listeners. And I have an identical twin brother, and he showed me a book in the early 80s. And even though I was raised Christian, I kind of got brainwashed in high school and beyond that, and kind of lost my way. And he came along, and I think most of your listeners might remember this book, but he said, you need to read this book. And it was The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And I still have a copy of that, and I'm still a fan of Hal Lindsey. And I read the book, and it just scared the crap out of me. And so from that point on, I decided, well, I want to find out whether or not this is legitimate. I want to know whether it's accurate, they're not making it up, and whether or not I can find this information in the Bible. And so I started to read the Bible, and I started to read anything I could get my hands on, and that just led me back to Jesus and to Christianity. And I have been a fanatic about not only prophecy but my other passions as well, and doing my best on my quest to be the best person I can be. But I have to admit, I'm a sinner like most people, and I do stumble. But that's how I came back to Jesus, and it's amazing. And I thought, wouldn't that be nice if somebody could actually write a book that might influence people? And that was one of the things that I wanted to do with this book, was to write a book that might influence people and talk about things that they may not be aware of, and aspects about the Bible they might have overlooked. And as I went through on the research on this, I started coming across so much material that I didn't know or didn't believe was in the genre. And so to be able to bring so much new information to the genre and prophecy and how it all ties together and connect dots that I don't believe other writers have connected before. So it was all that sort of coming together at the same time. And
that's really, really cool.
Yeah, so I mean, that was in 1980 or 81. So you can imagine how long I've been on the path of researching prophecy and things like that, matching it up with history and mythology, which are my other passions.
That's awesome. 81, 3 years before I was born. But that's great. I mean, that's so cool, because that's why I love having guests like you on, because then I get to learn something. And that's to me, that's the best part of life in general, is just getting to learn and getting to serve. And I love that. So it's great to have a guest like you on that shares that same passion. Something else that I want to address up front, because I know you, unfortunately, you've gotten a little bit of flack for this, and I don't think it's warranted or deserved. But I think that it's similar to, I recently, well, not too recently, but I wrote a book, Cherubim Chariots, where I got into other ancient texts, especially like ancient Hindu, texts and stuff like that, purely for, it's history. People have eyewitness accounts of things, but not for gospel. But I know, unfortunately, some people have thought that, and I don't think I think the people that say this haven't even read your book, because it's clear that's not what you were going for. But since you got into, you study some of those texts, that must mean that you're promoting it. And I know, as a gospel truth or something. And I know that's not true, but I want to give you the opportunity to, just say a brief couple sentences about that, just so people who aren't familiar with your book yet don't get put off right in the beginning of the show, just because we bring up, Gnostic text or ancient Indian text or something like that.
Yeah, and the avenues that I researched, I mean, it really gets into the areas that I think a lot of people might find on very thin ice. And I have to tell you, it was concerning, and how would I handle it and everything like that. But what I wanted to do was, as I continued on the research, I seemed to see these same stories that were popping up over and over and over and over and over. And they were consistent with the Bible from a macro level and a directional level, but from a different perspective. So either from polytheism or from secret societies, it matters not where it came from. They were telling a very, very similar story, but from their perspective. And so I wanted to bring that information out so that people could see that this is a very, very common story right around the world. And I also wanted to make sure that I could let those societies or religions or scriptures speak for themselves and not sort of try and twist those words or anything so that it could be considered accurate. Because everything that I put in the book, I believe, is also weighed, measured, and balanced against the accuracy of what the Bible says. And so there's really nothing in there that is contradicting what the Bible is saying. And you may find it challenging. You may find it that I've never thought of that. You may even find it disturbing. But everything that I have in the book is also backed up by the Bible. And so everything is measured against the Bible. So if anybody has any fears of that, please don't. And if anybody has any fears that I lost my soul in reading some of those items, many of them were interesting. Lots were not. But no, I remain a Christian 100%. And I'm so much of a contrarian. I'll go out of the way and say that if somebody has read the Quran and is Muslim, I don't understand why they didn't become Christian after reading the Quran. It's mind-boggling. Right. It's absolutely mind-boggling, and that's the message of the Quran. So again, I'm not going to support Islam here in any fashion, or the pacists or the religion organizations. But what I will say is that all that, reading those other religions, it just made me more of a Christian, more sound in my beliefs. There is nothing that I'm transposing from those beliefs into my beliefs. I just use them for context and to demonstrate that there's a very common narrative out in the world that I think people need to learn about.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I take that same stance when I look into other ancient texts as well. In my books, I handled it more, kind of like I think that people had real experiences with real things, and they wrote them down. And I mean, especially in the Vedic texts, there's a lot of that. And I in my book, I focused on Vimanas and stuff like that. But we can accept that people had experience with things and beings. We don't have to say that they're God, or that they're that they replace God, or we don't have to go that far with it at all. But just accepting that these may not all be fairy tales, in the sense that somebody just sat down and made it all up. I think people actually had real experiences with things, and they just probably didn't interpret it right. But and we can look at that, and like you said, we compare it against the Bible to get the correct interpretation. So, but yeah, I love your research style and the way that you approach this book. But yeah, I wanted to get that out of the way, just in case anybody read anything on Amazon, or if they read what the book was about. And I didn't want anybody to be scared off when they read like Islamic texts or anything like that. So I'm glad that we got that. Now the book is called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and at about 800 pages, it's quite a book. It's fantastic. Can you give us a brief summary of the book? Like what led you to write this?
Well, a brief summary of the book is The Genesis 6 Conspiracy is a 6,000-year investigation, a connected dots investigation into how secret societies and the Nephilim and the mystical religions that rose around the Nephilim and the secret societies and the ancient knowledge partnered to bring about the first apocalypse known as the flood. How those three organizations and descendants of them crossed the flood, how they affected things like Babel and Sodom and Gomorrah and the conquest, and how they imprinted our history all the way to the present time, what they're doing today, and how they plan on bringing about the end time, inclusive of the universal religion, world government, and the Antichrist.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's all stuff that I know is right up my alley, and most, if not all, the audience of this show. What's really cool about this book too is it brings up a lot of really unique elements, and that is kind of rare on the topic of the Nephilim, because so much has been written about it. You do a really good job. Can you go through some of the more unique elements and what the audience can expect to find that's unique about your book as compared to some of the others that might be out there?
Well, first of all, I think that people will be very, very surprised. Maybe not all, but most will be surprised that whether or not you're talking about Freemasonry accounts from before the flood, which they have an extensive record of, whether or not you're looking at Greek mythology or the Vedas and the various holy scriptures out of India, or the Popol Vuh from the Quiché Maya and the Aztecs and the Central Americans. It doesn't matter where you go around the world, they all tell the same story, what happened before the flood. A different perspective from a polytheist perspective, but they tell the same story about creation, and they tell the same story about how humankind went wrong, how they participated in helping to produce the giants. Whether they're not always called Nephilim, they're called Titans and Anunnaki and many, many other names around the world, and how these giants helped corrupt the ancient world and cause the flood. And so I think that's one of the first unique testimonies that it brings together for a lot of people. Some of the other unique things is that this is a conspiracy that has been going on since before the flood, and is the same conspiracy and the same organizations that have worked throughout history and are working today. And they all tell about this complete conspiracy all the way through the 6,000 years. And none of this is, I think, documented or connected. And what I particularly do is I bring in how and where mysticism arose, how it crossed the flood as well, what its relationship is with the giants. And when we get into the giants, and particularly the giants, it's the descendants of the giants, it's the bloodlines of the giants, and how they have survived, at least from their perspective, how they've survived, and the bloodlines that produced the royal houses that again have kept their genealogies throughout all of history and prehistory, producing all of the major royal families around the world, and how they still control the world today. And so if that is of interest to people, and how those bloodlines are related to the modern versions of mysticism, whether we're talking about Gnosticism or New Age or Theosophy or Eastern religions, or about modern secret societies like the Illuminati or the Rosicrucians or the Bilderbergers, or all of these different groups that they spawn, I think the readers will find this a very interesting read.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most, in my discovery of the Nephilim and study into Genesis 6, when I really first started getting started, is how much important information is really in those genealogies. And when we go to Sunday school and church, we usually just skip over those. I've never heard a sermon when I was I grew up Baptist, so when I was going to the Baptist church, I never heard a sermon on like the genealogies of Genesis or anything. But there's a lot of really important information there. And something that I want to ask too, you talked about a connection between mysticism, secret societies, and the Nephilim. What is the connection? What do those three have in common?
Well, let's talk about that. So everybody knows in the Bible we begin with Adam and Eve, and what secret societies and mysticisms and these other religions believed is that they received information from heaven, whether that was legitimate information or illegitimate. But they believe it was legitimate information from God while they were in Eden. But after the banishment, two branches formed, one being the branch of Cain and one being the branch of Seth. And that Cain took this message, and through his first son Enoch, they corrupted these sciences, and they added to it other information from the dark angels and created religions around it to secret this information that seemingly they developed to levels of unbelievable proportions, and to such proportions that they felt it had to be kept secret for two reasons. One, it might destroy the world. Two, they didn't feel that the mundane average human being was worthy enough to have that information. And so they created initiated societies and have done so ever since.
Yeah, definitely. I want to, as soon as I can stop stuttering, I want to backtrack a little. You said something about sacred sciences, and that's a point that I found really intriguing in the book. What are the 7 sacred sciences, and can you go into that?
Yeah, basically everybody's going to be fairly familiar with those sciences, and it's geometry, which is the 5th science, commonly known as masonry within the craft. It's astronomy, it's music, it's science in general, it's the arts, it's basic human knowledge that's broken down into 7, and arithmetic, obviously, into 7 different groups. But it's what they were able to do with this knowledge that is the scary part. And they actually believe that they built the pyramids and other monuments like that around the world before the flood, and that they took this society to a level probably similar to in technology to what we have today, and maybe developed in different areas and a little bit differently right now. And so they believe it is the secrets to the universe. And so when you hear about it today, it's the 7 liberal arts, and you'll hear that through Greek mythology as well. It's the same sciences, but it's what they did with them that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. What the Nephilim and flood narratives of Genesis 6? How are those connected to other giant mythologies of giants throughout the world and polytheistic religions around the world? Why are those testimonies so important to this type of research?
Well, it shows that this is just not a one-off story in the Bible, and it was so important that it was recorded and part of the memories of all cultures in the world. So something that it's like the great one world myth. It's our common legacy and heritage, and it's like the ancients are whispering to us that we need to go back and learn about prehistory. What happened, what caused the first apocalypse, because as we all know, or most people of prophecy know, that the end time will be like the days of Noah. And so I think when our Messiah says, learn about the days of Noah, we ought to take that with the veracity and importance that his words speak to, and learn how that's going to be important to bring about the second apocalypse, this time by fire. And so if Nephilim and secret societies and mysticism was a big part of the first apocalypse, they're likely going to be part of this apocalypse.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And I in a lot of my studies, I get into like quantum physics and stuff. I'm really interested in that. But there's a lot of parallels in that theology. Not that the science itself is a theology, but it's almost become that, because the scientists that teach this stuff, they don't just stick with the observation. They get into their own interpretation, but they teach their interpretation as if it's just universal truth. So like, documentaries like What the Bleep Will Do, or What the Bleep Do We Know, they'll have, some science in there, but then they'll say, well, this proves that God can't be a personal God. He's like a universal force, like in Star Wars or something.
Right.
And they'll try to say that, the science says that. So, I mean, we're almost getting into this, new mysticism or really new age nowadays, in science. It's progressing more and more like that. And that is something I want to touch on as well. But before
let's talk a little bit just quickly about one of the things that one of their sciences that they developed afterwards to help guide and control. So reason over faith, as they like to refer to it as, reason over knowledge. And that is the art of philosophy, which they believe, and it's actually part of their religion. They've just called it a science. And so that science, that the science of philosophy, or the religion of philosophy, dictates how all of science ought to be interpreted.
Yeah, and we see that a lot nowadays. It's really rare, probably near impossible, to find physicists that, for one, makes any sense. It's almost like they speak a different language. but that can actually separate the philosophy from the actual findings. I mean, a really big example of that was when the Higgs boson was discovered, and it was called the God particle. And the particle itself, I mean, it's an interesting particle, but it's not. It has nothing to. The only thing that it has to do with God is what every particle has to do with God, and that He created it. It's not proof of God. It's not proof against God. It's not, it's not anything in those regards. In a philosophical, way of thinking, that particle is not anything special to the other particles. Now, scientifically speaking, it's phenomenal. It's an important discovery, but it got that label God particle. So when that came out, there were a lot of Christians thinking it was proof of God. There were Christians thinking scientists were making fun of us. They didn't really know what to do with it. Unfortunately, it's what happens when philosophy gets mixed in with science.
Sure. And people should not find this surprising, because if you look at the rise of modern education and modern science, it goes back really to the birth of the Royal College in England. And the Royal College, also known as the Royal Society, is also known as the Invisible College. And this society, this organization, all of the...
What? What about him?
Education institutions still referred to today as the parent organization. It was formed by the secret societies. It was formed by Rosicrucians and Freemasonry to pay tribute to the great architect of the universe, which is another name they use for Lucifer. And so if you want, and I'll cover that off in my book as people get deeper into the book. So we should not find this surprising. We should not find it surprising that science is inundated with symbols. Let's say the medical association with the almost Hermes motif, with the snake around what they would call the tree of Eden in their belief system, or that there are initiations or things that they swear to, whether you're in engineering or whatever. This is all part of the same belief system. So people being educated there are being brainwashed with a philosophy which is actually a religion.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And as much as I love science, it is becoming, and it really, I think, always has been to a certain extent, a religion. And it's kind of it's unnerving, the directions that it's taking nowadays, and the way that they justify some of the things that they're doing, especially in transgenics and the transhumanist movement and things like that. They're doing some of the most ungodly things based on their own man-made philosophies. It has no real bearing on anything outside of themselves. I definitely, yeah.
And all of that is just another form of the Nephilim doctrine, whether or not it's a new man by bioengineering, or new man by genetics, or DNA manipulation, or fallen angels populating with women to create hybrids, or DNA manipulation by aliens, or aliens creating hybrids. It is the same philosophy, and it is the same philosophy that they were trying to do in Germany with the new man and the super race, because it's the same belief system. And again, I'll spend a complete chapter on the Third Reich and lay that all out for people so that they understand it's the same story and the same belief system and the same end goal. The Third Reich was about bringing on a 1,000-year reign, just as a copy of the millennial reign in the Bible. And the new age that they're trying to bring about is another millennial reign as well. It's just they believe that they're going to win the battle, and they're going to have their belief system as opposed to the Christian belief system or the Jewish belief system or monotheism. So again, it's really important to learn from history, and I think that's the message of the Messiah.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, and especially with what happened in Genesis, all this brought the flood, and so if we were to learn from history, we should see that something like that, this time by fire, and that brings up an interesting question too. I think anytime we do like a Nephilim show on the Sharpening, I always ask this because I'm always interested to know what people think, because it's a big mystery. I think I've heard about 3 pretty good theories about it, but I'm curious what you think. how do you believe that the giants or the Nephilim survived the flood? Because we see that they make a reappearance. The three main views that I've heard is that somehow the genes survived on the flood, maybe through one of Noah's son's wives. The other one is that the fallen angels came down and did it again, or multiple incursions. Then the other one is that there may have been some sort of genetic tampering, or after the flood, because the world would have been littered with bodies of dead giants, and we would assume. So maybe they manipulated the genes and cloned them or something. What do you think? Any of those do you think are possible, or do you have a different idea? What's your opinion?
Well, I'm going to cover that in the book and in significant detail. My gut feeling is that giants did survive the flood, and I'm going to go into the book and explain that. I do leave open the possibility that there was a second impassioned violation against the laws of creation, and so they were created afterwards. That's certainly possible, because if you read Genesis 6, you could interpret it both ways. They either survived the flood or they were recreated afterwards. And so that, to me, is pretty speculative as to how that happened. And so I wanted to be able to try and answer that question. And so if we're talking about an impassioned second violation, Sodom and Gomorrah comes to the surface as one of the most obvious answers, and I'll bring in support from the Gnostic religions to suggest that there was a second impassioned violation at Sodom and Gomorrah, which was one of the reasons why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, and also bring how Nephilim were related to the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative that people may not be aware of. But I'll also talk about from not only the biblical perspective, but other mythologies and religions, how giants survived the flood. And most people believe that nobody survived the flood, except that, let's just start with Og as an example. And if you look at Deuteronomy 3 or Joshua 12, he was noted as the last of the Rephaim. Well, that's not possible, or the Bible is in contradiction. And I don't believe the Bible is in contradiction. And so Jewish mythology believes Og did survive the flood, and have a lot of legends. Louis Ginsburg writes great legends from the Hebrews, and Og is one of those prominent figures in there. So that's certainly one possibility. And why wasn't he the last of the Rephaites? Well, even when we get into Goliath, and I'll connect Goliath to being Rephaite and being a Nephilim, is he was considered a Rephaite at that time. And because Og wasn't killed at that time, there's a lot of speculation that he was actually a descendant or an ancestor of Goliath. So the wording is very, very odd, and I think that really points to one suggestion that giants survived the flood, as Unger's Bible Dictionary suggests that Og was also a survivor of the flood. And let's remember that Og had a brother named Sihon, and so that means he survived the flood because he was a brother, if that's the case. Then we get into all of these other anomalies in the Old Testament, unaccounted for peoples. The Rephaites or the Anakites, the Zamzamites, the Abites, all of these different people that are not in the table of nations. So why are they not in the table of nations? We're led to believe by standard Christian dogma that everybody who survived the flood then begat from either Noah or his 3 sons. Well, these names are nowhere to be found. And then there's other peoples, not only than the giants, but there's the Hittites that are thought to be giants as well, and the Hivites and the Horites. Where did the Horites come from? They are in the table of nations with the descendants of Esau, but those descendants of Seir, they come out of nowhere. Who is Seir? He is just inserted. How is that possible? I know it makes sense, and I'll cover off the connections to Seir and Esau as I go through the book, and particularly at the end of the book, but they just come out of nowhere. And then there's peoples like the Gershites and the Girgazites and the Kenizzites and the Kenites. All of these people come out of nowhere, and of course the infamous Amalekites. And I'll spend a lot of time on the Amalekites as well, tracing them back to being people that crossed the flood. So I think it's quite possibly both.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It very well could be. Yeah, and I agree with you. There's no, I don't believe there's any contradictions in the Bible either. So whatever the answer is, it should, flow through the whole thing. So that's why I'm always interested about that, to get people's take on it, because it is a big mystery. But yeah, it very well could be both. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think,
yeah.
Just sorry to interrupt. I don't think when I say that the Bible doesn't contradict itself. What I'm also saying, though, in tandem with that is that the Bible adds more information as you go. And so you have to be careful that just because it looks a little differently, if you look in the flood narrative, for example, and everybody thinks that all the animals, 2 of each kind, were taken. Well, all of a sudden then you read there's 7 of the clean animals taken. Well, that's not a contradiction. Yep. That's just additional information that's telling more about the story. And clearly the Bible can't be in contradiction if it says the Nephilim were both before and after the flood.
Yes, absolutely. So what kind of impact did the giants have on the post-flood world?
Well, we learn very quickly in Genesis that an incident at Babel happened. And in that incident, there's a city being built, and there's a tower being built, and we're also told something very, very odd. And that odd statement is that if working as one people with one language, there's nothing that they can't do. To paraphrase it, what is all this referring to? This is referring to the partnership between Nimrod and Hermes, and the 7 sacred sciences, and the mysticism, and the rise shortly after the flood, and their partnership with Nephilim. And so this is a very, very important story, because again, it has so many allegories and inferences that are going to come about in the end time. So to me, it's very important to learn about prehistory. And so what happened right after the flood is you have Nimrod, who some people think was a giant. I'm going to make the case in the book that he's not, because Nimrod is in the Table of Nations in First Chronicles and Genesis, but his descendants are not. So now that's suggesting to me that he probably married into the Nephilim bloodline, and therefore his descendants were not listed thereafter. That's my rationale for that. But they partnered together to reestablish all the awful things that took place in prehistory. And then they also imprinted on Sodom and Gomorrah, as we talked about. But more importantly is after Babel, Nephilim, who were the kings and the potentates of the old world, usurped the kingships in the new world. And so in Chaldea, in Egypt, in Seir, with the Amalekites, the Mitanni dynasty, the Hittites, and all of the kingships around the world, they usurped. And they continued to survive with these dynasties, and they have impacted all of our history while partnering with mysticism and these sciences. And they continue to influence our world today, and these bloodlines from Nephilim survive today. And I'll make a case as we go through the book that I'll give good guidance to that these bloodlines will be the bloodlines of the Antichrist, and narrow that down to the families that will likely present the Antichrist.
Yeah, that's something that I've thought for a while too, that the Nephilim bloodlines are have a connection there, definitely. A really interesting thing that I love that you got into this in the book. How are dragons, berries, and snakes connected to the descendants of the giants?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so in so many ways, and I'll try and explain some of it. So first thing I want just to underline, and everybody subconsciously knows it, that there are serpent images, cobra images, viper images, snake images in every society. And there's also the dragon. And people, and we're taught today that there's no evidence for the dragon. But it's very odd that you have this common sort of world myth that's everywhere, every continent, every culture knows about dragons. So let's just talk a little bit about that. So I'll make a case in the book that the angels, the dark angels who went to Mount Hermon and mated with human females were seraphim angels. And they were part of a group that a lot of your people will be aware of, known as the Watchers, and in Greek they were known as the Grigori. Well, seraphim angels, not only some references in the Bible, which only seraph is in the Bible in Isaiah, refers to snakes. But seraphim angels were thought to look like snakes, like vipers. They had a face of a viper, and I'll bring some very parallel and biblical references in the book to substantiate that. And their offspring, the Nephilim, looked just like them. So when you see in other cultures all of these images of gods that look like snakes and giants that look like snakes and all of this imagery, they were just producing art and keeping a record of their gods and the Nephilim. And so if you look at now the seraphim angel that has the face of a viper, and you put wings on that, what do you have? Have a dragon. And if people look at the Eden incident, we look at the serpent losing its hands and its feet and its voice and had to crawl on the ground thereafter. Well, what's important to notice on that is that there's a lot of belief out there that there was more than just serpents that had hands and legs like a crocodile would have, or feet, let's say 4 feet. But in prehistory, there's mythology that this animal actually walked on 2 feet and was bigger than a human being and was fairly intelligent. And I'll cover that off in the book as well. But that some of these forms of serpents before the Eden incident also had wings, which again would be an animal form of the dragon. So I think when we look at the dragon imagery, we understand that the Nephilim looked just like them in the beginning, and that they usurped the kingships and the religions in both prehistory and after the flood. It makes sense that there's this dragon and serpent imagery everywhere. And we look at the influence that these societies and mysticism have had throughout the millennia. Again, it's not surprising to me that we see this imagery in fairy tales and in literature and in all of our entertainment, because they're the ones keeping this genealogy and information alive in different forms other than the genealogies. And people don't understand that this is not done just to entertain people. This is done to brainwash people in preparation for the end game so that they'll find it acceptable. And so when we look at all of these different aspects, you shouldn't be surprised that Dracula is telling the same story. Drinking blood, which was a typical Nephilim portrait, to keep them immortal, which the Nephilim originally were and want to be immortal. That the Christian church or the Catholic church is their mortal enemy. All of these allegories are encoded in, and if you walk through any of this type of literature, fairy tale or otherwise, what seemingly is innocent, what is seemingly outside the box, they're going to have the same religion and allegories and genealogies and secrecies in there. So if you get into King Arthur, if you get into Robin Hood, you're talking about the same thing over and over and over again.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to ask too, do you think that there's do you think these things are still presenting themselves to people? Because there's a lot of supposed alien encounters that they'll abductees or experiencers or contactees, whatever you want to call it, they will claim that they have seen reptilian beings. Do you think there's a connection there?
Well, there's definitely a connection there, whether or not these are shape-shifting beings or not, that would just take a human form. I guess that's possible. That would have to be fallen angels, in my opinion, who in a lot of beliefs have the shape-shifting capability. And I guess if there's there's really only one biblical reference where I'd say two, where that could be. One would be as if Lucifer, Satan, actually morphed into a snake to go into Eden. And the second one would be at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where the angels that were sent, the three of them, looked like human beings, and Abraham did not realize they were not human beings. So there's a belief that in the physical world they can change their form, and they can also change sex, which means that they could have produced, let's say, a more angelic type of Nephilim that would be the lower gods in the polytheist pantheon, because all of the pantheons are the same. All comes from the same belief system and the same dark angels. So that can answer sort of that aspect of it. What was the question again?
It was about the. Oh no, that's and I say a lot in the show. If this wasn't called the sharpening, it would be called the tangent, because the show has me as a host, and that's what I do. So that's totally. I think he answered it though. It's about the reptilian race.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's another aspect I wanted to go down on. Thanks for putting me back on track. So let's bring in the fairy equation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I'll talk about fairies in the book significantly, and again, it's one of those things that comes up in all sorts of literature and entertainment. Again, for everybody, understand that that's there for a reason. And so in the fairy mythology, there were 4 different kinds of fairies. And so if you're into Tuatha De Danann and Celtic mythology, some of this is going to be fairly familiar with you. So there are the opalescent fairies that came to this planet from somewhere else and rebelled against God. And so they are translucent. You can sort of see through them, and they're a shining being. And then they produced another fairy through mating with human females, and they became the earthly fairies, who were shining beings as well. And for people that don't know, the original Nephilim, their eyes shone. They actually glowed, and it was part of what made them scary. And you'll see that. That's why you see that in science fiction movies. Let's say like Stargate series. That's why their eyes will glow. Okay, that's that same idea being kept alive again. And so below that, there are 2 sets of little people, and people will know the little people like the leprechauns or the gnolls, and there's several different subsets. And in the one set, there's 3 sets of little people, and inside one of those little people is a set called the Gray Neighbors. Now, now these Gray Neighbors have the same physical description as the Gray Aliens. These little fairies also had flying machines, and they kidnap people. And they did.
Hi, Han. Good to see you. I've still got 30 or 40 minutes to go anyway, so that's cool.
And they were looking to reproduce with them to regenerate their gene pool, and they did other scientific things. And then they would return the people, and the people, it would say in fairy lore, after a fortnight, so let's say about 40 days, as I recall, a fortnight, and they would not have a memory of this. So I provide a description of fairy abduction in the book, and I think people find it startling as to how close it is to the aliens. So I think there's a connection in this all the way through. I know a lot of people believe that aliens are demons or fallen angels with that shape-shifting capability. That's certainly a possibility. I'm thinking that these little beings have been around since prehistory, and they also somehow survived the flood. Because again, in fairy mythology, you have these portals called knolls and mounds and fairy mounds, and in the Grail lore, the ladies of the lake protect the entrance to the portals to the other world. And in the alien mythology, many believe that UFOs come through these portals. So there's a direct connection in here all the way through. I think demons are here. They're the bodiless giants, where they're of the immortal first generation that weren't permitted into heaven and didn't go to sleep, and they continue to possess people and cause mayhem. But I also believe that these little people could possibly be beings that survived. And if you look at Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and you see all of these little fairies and elves and things, it's quite a big part of the different sort of races that are in that story. And at the end of Tolkien's trilogy is these people are seen going away on a boat because it's the time of humankind. And that, again, is telling me that they're telling us messages of prehistory that they want to keep alive, that the people that they've enlightened or illuminated or educated or whatever know exactly what they're talking about, that somehow these beings also survive. So that's my take on it.
Wow, that's really interesting. That yeah, you just kind of blew me away there. That's I've actually never heard that before. The connection with the fairies and gnomes and things. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's something I've always been interested in, was some of these cryptozoology. I can't even say that. Cryptozoology. Some of the things that eschatological. That's another one I have a hard time
I want
saying.
to try that one.
Always been really interested in that, and we even the last episode we did on Bigfoot possibly being an extra dimensional, angelic or fallen angel being. We got into some of that. So, but yeah, that's an area of the book that I love that you got into. I've always been interested in that, and it really does make a lot of sense.
Well,
go ahead.
And there'll be another aspect of the fairy, not only allegory, but the fairy bloodline that I'm going to connect through in the book, and particularly as we get into the last parts of the book. And I'll distinguish between the dragon bloodline and the fairy bloodline, and I'll show how those branches fanned out and how they've rejoined. And one is the male patriarch bloodline, which is the dragon bloodline, and the fairy bloodline is the matriarch or the female bloodline of inheritance. And I'll bring those together.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about that, because you talk about in the book the post-Diluvian dynasties. How did how were the early dominant dynasties? How they affect our history to where we find ourselves today?
Well, if you look at the main kingship dynasties that most people are aware of, so everybody's aware of the Egyptian dynasty, and so that's one major effect. Obviously, the descendants of Nimrod, and after Babel, where he went into Mesopotamia, into and basically the father of the Assyrians, father of the Persians, and so those dynasties grew up. And then within the Middle East, you have the Hittite dynasty, which was disappeared, say somewhere between 1200 and 1400 BCE, depending on who you're talking to. And certainly the Philistines give them a good whooping as they expropriated their land in the Middle East. But the Mitanni dynasty was also a very familiar one, and these dynasties would intermarry to keep their bloodlines pure. And if they wanted to start a new dynasty, they had to make sure that they started it with an ennobled bloodline of a female. And so if they wanted to export a new dynasty somewhere, it would start with the matriarchy. Even though everybody thinks of the patriarchy as the dominant one, you have to keep in mind their belief system is both male and female, and it's all throughout their religions. When you look at it, whether it's Isis and Osiris, it's male and female, it's dualistic all the way through in every aspect. And so that has a very, very important. So these dynasties survived right through to the time of the Greek Empire. And even the Greeks make, and I'll cover this off in the book as well, about Alexandria being linked back to giants. And the Greeks, it may be a mythology, and he may have been just a dictator that took over. But again, this whole thing dominated all of the major empires. And as these original dynasties kind of disappeared, I'll track through where they went to. And so if you look at the Egyptian dynasty, the last one that is of noteworthiness is the Amarna dynasty. And that's King Tut, and that's Akhenaten, and that's Skoda, and that's Nefertiti, and A, or I think as other people pronounce it. So why was that so important is because that dynasty disappeared, and where did they go? And I'll cover that off in the end of the book, but they didn't die out, or at least their belief system says that they didn't die out. So where did they go? These bloodlines survived to repopulate the dynasties in Europe. Now, this doesn't necessarily cover off the Red Dragon dynasties of China, although you can make a case that they migrated out of the Middle East and in that direction. But there's a separate bloodline in there. I didn't follow that one because the book is long enough as it is. I kept more for the Western side of civilization. But understand there's a very strong Red Dragon dynasty, as they call it, in Asia. And so these dynasties survived to make most of the kingships that we're aware of through modern history. And most of the power being transferred back and forth would be either a Vatican-dominated kingship or from these dragon kingships. So when you look at history, look at it from a view of there's two different sides with warfare going on all of the time. And these dynasties succeeded in, for the most part, keeping their royal bloodlines on the throne all of the time. And so if you do, let's say, get a usurping of the Plantagenet, that was in England, and that was by Henry VIII, and you wonder why he's so maligned. Well, he may have been a bad person, but that's not the real motive. It's because he would be coming from as an outsider, whether it's Vatican sponsored or not. And so if you look at, let's say, Shakespeare, who wrote a lot about genealogies and kingships, he is documenting these bloodlines as well, even at that time. And he is not nice on the Tudors. I mean, he takes them takes them down in his writings, and whether it's Richard III or whoever else, or King Lear that he's talking about, or Hamlet, he's holding those bloodlines in a completely different sort of respect level. And so these bloodlines may not have kingships dominating the world today, but these families control what goes on in the world today. And so we may not recognize them as kings, but some of them we will. And understand that you need to follow the King of Jerusalem title. This is the title of the Antichrist, and it's part of their bloodline legacy. And they'll declare themselves that the Antichrist will declare himself as the King of Jerusalem, and also putting in the Benjamite lines of that inheritance that Joshua had originally given back during the Exodus. And I'll cover that off in the book as well.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. How does what is the relationship between the descendants of giants and the Antichrist? How do these bloodlines play into that?
Well, because these bloodlines have been intermixed and ennobled and tracked all the way through, they're going to use these genealogies to establish the pedigree of the Antichrist, and that he goes way back and back to these fallen giants. You have to remember, he's the Antichrist, so he's going to have a completely different pedigree than what Jesus has. But they will also, and again, if you go into literature, you're going to learn about this as well in terms of modern literature. When we talk about, let's say, the Da Vinci Code, they're going to find a way to mix in, I don't believe rightly, I don't think they can actually prove it, these will be falsified genealogies, that Jesus survived, had children, and has intermarried into these bloodlines. And so they've been keeping these bloodlines purified. They keep 3 possible Antichrist figures indoctrinated and ready to go all of the time. And when the time is right, they will select one of these and he will step forward.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. And I love that you get into that topic in the book, because I love Bible prophecy, and obviously the Antichrist is a big piece of that. Something that we do on the show, we have viewer questions, and we are at that time. For the audience, if you want the chance to send in questions to guests, you can go to Facebook and ask to join the Sharpening Facebook group. And I'll happy to accept you as long as you don't have a fake account. So we got enough of those as it is. But before any show, I'll pin a post at the top that says who the guest is going to be, what the show is going to be about, and give you, the audience, the opportunity to ask questions. So again, you can go to the Sharpening Facebook group to do that. We do have, well, actually, we have two questions. The first one I missed. It was from earlier, but I'm glad that I caught it. Timothy asks, you label yourself as a Christian contrarian. What does the term Christian contrarian mean?
Good question.
Well, it means that I don't come by my views as a standard Christian dogma that's taught in the churches. I know there are so many different dogmas and things being taught out there, so I let the Bible speak for itself. And if I don't understand something in the Bible, I'm going to research it until I think I have that understanding and back it up. So it's a very contrarian view that I prefer to read the scripture and understand it for what it says. And I know there's more learned people out there than probably me, for sure, but I'm not going to listen to what somebody tells me. I will, but I'm going to check it out. And if it doesn't totally add up, then I'm probably going to dismiss that perspective.
Amen. I'm right there with you. I'm the same way. You know, I grew up in a Baptist church, and it was it was nice. It was loving and everything, but there were a lot of questions I had that just didn't have answers or even really any kind of solid answers to it. It left me curious, and eventually, and this isn't the church's fault. This is my own fault. Eventually, it led me down the path of New Age. You know, I got into New Age theology, trying to find answers to some of the stranger questions that that I had that they didn't want to touch in the church. But through that, coming out of that, and then really dedicating my life to Jesus and doing what I'm doing now, that did lead me to, instead of just accepting what tradition, what church tradition tells me, I wanted to see what the Bible said, because there are a lot of differences in what church tradition will say, yes, as opposed, compared with the Bible. So I am right there with you, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that stance and that tactic. It's the same one that I take in all my research as well. Michael asks, do you believe they are building an army of Nephilim giants and monsters to do battle with the Lord at Armageddon now in the deep underground military bases?
Well, nobody really knows what they're doing down there, but I believe the question was, what do I believe? What I do believe is they're doing a number of nefarious things. I do believe they are working on DNA modifications and biotechnology and things like that. I'm not convinced that they've got giants ready to go. But I do believe they are trying to create a new man, and I do believe they are preparing to make a stand that's not that far away. But I don't think there's giants down there at this point in time.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely interesting to look into, though, especially if you look into things like the Denver airport and the possible or supposed base that's supposed to be under there, or the Dulce base. Lots of really interesting things out there. I don't know how truthful any of it is, but it's definitely interesting.
They're preparing. It's for what?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what is your view of that? Like, what do you think the whole end time scenario? How is it going to play out? What's going to be what's going to be the thing that they use to deceive everyone? Is it going to be like a fake alien thing, or is it going to be some kind of political takeover of the world? How do you see all of this? It's kind of a big question, but how do you see all of this kind of unfolding?
It's going to be some of each in there. So we're going to have an alien.
Okay, this is a year old, guys.
Aspect to it. All depends on how they want to present it, but likely an alien aspect that we're just one of many species sitting at the galactic table, like Star Wars, like Babylon 5, like Star Trek, in that there are two sides to this war, and this side is for freedom in terms of the aliens and stuff, and fighting against the evil God. Because you have to remember that these people believe that Lucifer and God are equals.
Yeah.
And that they actually have a chance to win this, and this is an ongoing fight. So we're going to be asked to fight for our rebellion. That's going to be this underlying tone. So there's going to be an alien involvement. And even if we look at some of prophecy, we read in Daniel and Revelation where this war reaches into the heavens. And so that's a bit allegorical, but I think that's a reference that there's an alien presence that's going to be utilized in that. We also have to understand that the fallen angels are going to be released in the end days out of the abyss, where they were locked away before. So that's going to be an aspect in terms of Nephilim and how they work with possible aliens and the governments and the secret societies and all these other things going on. So all of this is coming together. We can see that coming together, I think. But if we look from history, whether we look at prehistory or Babel, we saw that first there was the universal religion. And so that should come together first. And the false prophet will stem out of that. So whether we're talking about Enoch, son of Cain, not of Seth, and people need to understand there were two Enochs in prehistory, and they were not the same, and there are different books surviving written by each, that there is that as a false prophet and the potentates through the Nephilim that came along, just like we'll have descendants of Nephilim and potentates that are going to form world government, but you have to have the universal religion first, in my opinion. And just like at Babel, we had Hermes. He was the false prophet that was going, that was leading the universal religion there. So we have to have the universal church. Then we have to have the false prophet. That will lead to, because of the power of the universal religion, to 10 empires being set up. Just as Daniel talks about, just as the Club of Rome has planned. And that's their job, to bring about these 10 empires. And I look at those as trading blocks, economic zones, powers of influence, not separate countries, as so many prophetic people have looked at in the past. So they'll have 10 different empires in the world that form this world government. And it will be the Antichrist that negotiates this world treaty. He won't be totally known. Christians will recognize him as the Antichrist, but he won't be crowned Antichrist until halfway through the end time. And so there's a distinct order of how this needs to have happened. And I know it's difficult to believe that there'll be universal religion, but that's what Revelation tells us. And that the Antichrist is going to rise that quickly to power, and he's not going to have to do it by war. He's just going to usurp at the middle of the tribulation 3 of those empires, and expect those to be the Western democracies, in my opinion, because he's going to distribute the plunder, which is another word for wealth distribution. And so all of this has played out in the past, and that's why I have one of the chapters that is named as I transition from the old part of the history of the Nephilim into modern times. Nothing new is under the sun. We've seen this before. We're going to see it again. So we're going to see an ever-growing movement to bring down borders and attacks against nationalism, Christians and monotheists being slowly set aside as the mundane, the people that will not be permitted to join the new age because we're not worthy and we're incapable of evolving. This will only be reserved for what they would say, some people might say is the RH bloodline, but they also refer to it as the gene of Isis, that there's a particular gene, what they believe that they have. These will be the people that will take over their new age, not the regular people, and it's usually the rich. So, but that's sort of a broad stroke is how I see things coming together. And look for it to come together through, the slow movement of the negotiation of free trade treaties, technology. But then, as with all prophecy, in my opinion, is for it to happen very quickly in short steps with cataclysmic events. So you can imagine an economic disaster or other disasters that will unite humankind, nuclear war, but there'll be something that comes along that speeds the process up in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think we're even starting to see that in our country nowadays. What do you think that that the one world religion is going to be? Do you think that it's going to be one of the religions on earth now, say Islam or New Age, that's going to rise and take over? Do you think it's going to be something else entirely?
It's the old religion of Babylon, Babel, Enoch. It will. They've got moles all through Christianity today. The Gnostics are everywhere. Everybody knows what's going on in Rome. Rome is going to be the center for this religion, and it will take a tribute out of every transaction that takes place. It'll be that powerful when it comes about. So we're going to see some things that influence the Roman Church very, very quickly. If St. Malachi is correct in his prophecy of popes, then we are on the last pope. And incidentally, he's not only called the anti-pope, but also the black pope. And so if Malachi is accurate, and it's not canonized, I recognize that. But the black pope is the leader of the Jesuits. And we have a Jesuit who is the leader, and the white pope is the leader of the Vatican. So we have a black pope and a white pope leading the Vatican. But what also people don't know, anti-pope also means replacement pope. And so for the first time, we have two popes. And Benedict was replaced. So if we're going to start seeing a speeding up, then we've got the right pope, because this is supposed to be the last pope before the false prophet. I know people think Francis, in many aspects, is either the false prophet or the Antichrist. He's not. He's too old, I think. And we need a transition. Look for the Mary apparitions out of Catholicism to rise to significance in the Roman Church as the whole thing sort of takes over Catholicism. And I'm not a Catholic. My parents, my wife's parents, and are Catholics, very strong Catholics. They're good people. This influence is just going to usurp the church and become universal church. And we know it is the Roman Church because it sits on 7 hills in Revelation, and there's only one city that sits on 7 hills. So this will be the religion. So it will be mysticism that takes over Roman Catholicism, that uses cataclysms. And if you look at Medjugorje on the Mary apparitions come back around, these children were indoctrinated in the 90s. They will go out with messages to the world to convert to one religion, repent, or a cataclysm will happen. And there'll be 10 of these messages. I think this is going to play a significant part in making that shift to bring about the universal religion. And so it will be mysticism inside of broken Christianity. How they break Christianity, go to the Da Vinci Code and all of the writings and the Holy Grail legends, and you'll learn all about it, is they are going to try and convince people that Jesus did not die on the cross. And therefore, as Paul said, if he did not die on the cross, then Christianity is a lie and our religion falls. And that's how they're going to go after it. They're going to go after Paul, and they're going to go after the resurrection and the virgin birth. And so they're going to say that part of these descendants through Joseph of Arimathea taking the Grail children married into these Nephilim bloodlines that I'll lay out through you in the book. So this is how Christianity will fall, or at least be controlled, although those who are faithful are going to be persecuted, but we'll know what's going on. And we'll need to be patient and endure. But Christianity, as we know it, will change, and the moles inside the church and all these other things going around will make that happen.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's definitely something that we need to keep watching.
Especially the Pope's running things.
Keep watching out for. What are some of the other things that like secret societies are doing today to prepare us for what's to come? You know, to deceive us or to break apart the church, or how do the secret societies fit into the whole plan here?
Well, the secret societies, they are controlling all of these different aspects, and there's a hierarchy to these secret societies. So people are familiar with Freemasonry, but they're just one aspect, and they really get involved on the political and sort of business aspect and start selecting people to be initiated, become illuminated. And once they're illuminated, they then become the Illuminati. So they organize groups like the Skull and Bones and the Bilderbergers, the CFR, Trilateral Commission, Club of Rome, all these different organizations that are trying to move the world together and to form a world government. So that's the political aspect. The secret societies also control the banking arm. And the banking arm, and I'll talk a lot about the Rothschilds, they're only the visible part, but they were created, the Rothschilds, as the banking arm. And if you look at what's going on in the world today, if you look at some of the last bastions of countries that don't have a Federal Reserve Bank, let's say like Iraq or Afghanistan and Iran and Korea, I think there was like 7 that were left that didn't have a reserve bank. They're finding ways to overthrow those countries and change their political stature so that the banks can get control of those remaining countries, and they'll continue to fall as we sort of march towards global occupation, as Gary Koch said in the 90s. And so they're active. They have trust groups that influence all of our education. These are tax-funded trust groups, and I'll document this in the book, as Gary Koch did, that fund the propagandizing and brainwashing of education and preparing people for the elite. So they're behind all of that with their soldiers. You have to understand, this is a Leviathan that not only has many arms, but many heads. And I don't use that allegory lightly, because that's a dragon type allegory. They are everywhere. They are so well organized. They are moving every aspect. If you look at anything that's going on that can cross borders, for example, they're organizing it, and it's coming from the left. And it's coming from the left because that's part of their belief system. And again, I'll document that from that political aspect in the book. And the Nazis are a terrific example of it. And they'll brainwash people to the extent that everybody thinks the Nazis are right-wing. They're national socialists. They've just been reinvented as these right-wing skinheads funded by these groups to make people think differently, because they're going to implement the same system. You want to know what the end time is going to look like? Look at what Hitler did.
Yeah.
It's going to be an exact sort of carbon copy of that, probably including burning people.
Wow. Yeah, I agree. We're definitely headed for dark times. But before we sum up the show, I want to give you the chance. If people want to know more about you or order your book, where can they go?
Well, first of all, you can go to my website, www.genesis6conspiracy.com. On there, I've got a blurb on the 98 chapters. I left out the preface and epilogue, so I guess technically I got 100 chapters in my book. There's on each chapter, there's a little bit of write-up on there to give you a flavor of that chapter is all about. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm also on Twitter. And if you're looking for me, just to Google Genesis 6 Conspiracy, you're going to find me. It's available. The book is available in hard copy and Kindle format. It's available on my website for a personalized copy if you want it personalized or autographed. There's also links to get the Kindle version there. There's also links to barnesandnoble.com and to amazon.com. My book is available on pretty much all the online distributors of books around the world, including Fishbond, including Amazon around the world, and many, many other ones. It's also available through Christian bookstores. STL Distribution, it distributes my book to the stores. So if you want to go into your favorite bookstore, they have it. At least they'll have it available if they don't have it on the shelf. So it's fairly widely available. All depends on how much you want to pay and where you want to buy it from.
Fantastic, and everybody should check it out. It's an excellent book. So to sum up the whole show, what would be the one main thing that you would want the audience to take away from this episode?
Well, I would say 2 things.
Good
One
question.
is learn about history and prehistory so you can understand what's going to happen. And the second thing is pay very close attention to the imagery and the allegories and the types of beings and things that we're talking about in this book, because if you want to understand the times we're in, this imagery is everywhere. And it's also part of history, and it's there for a reason. You want to learn about why what Cinderella is all about? You're going to get it in this book. You're going to understand why fairies are so popular, why trolls are in so much literature. It's going to tell you what to look for to decode the times that we're in.
Fantastic. All right. Well, it looks like we're about all the time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about your research. It's been an absolute blast. It's a great book, and I really can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Oh, appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversation. Invite me back anytime. This is a passion of mine. I just love to talk about it.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have to have you back on. That would be great. That, again, was Gary Wayne, author of this excellent book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. I obviously highly recommend it. Gary's one of those authors, again, like I said before, that proves there is still more to learn on the Nephilim, and at least 800 pages. And again, don't let the large size of the book be daunting or it's an easy.
If you haven't got the book, get the book. Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Gary Wayne. It's a brilliant book. Okay, guys, I'm out. See you tomorrow. God bless.